Hey guys, this is Dr. Spook's channel. First, I want to apologize for the long absence, but I promise you if there's enough engagement with this video, I'll be back in with full force. Now, I want you to smash the like button. Let's get started. The old Ford pickup truck groaned as it navigated the winding dirt road, its weathered frame protesting against each bump and turn. Layla gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white against the worn leather. The dense forest of the Cascade Mountains in western Oregon pressed in on both sides, the towering Douglas firs and western red cedars creating a natural tunnel that seemed to swallow them whole. "Are you absolutely sure this is the right way?" Meg asked from the passenger seat, her voice a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She pushed her glasses up her nose and squinted at the crumpled map spread across her lap. "I swear it wasn't this remote last time." Layla nodded, though a seed of doubt had taken root in her mind. "This is where the GPS led us before it lost signal. The Whispering Woods campground should be just ahead. You know how these back roads can be. They probably haven't updated the maps in years." From the back seat, Osmond leaned forward, his usually stoic face betraying a hint of concern. "I don't remember the trail being this overgrown. How long has it been since we were last here? 5 years?" "6, Alexa corrected, not looking up from her phone as she futilely searched for a signal. "We haven't been back since that crazy trip after high school graduation, remember? It was right after they shut down the old Blackwater lumber operation nearby." A low whine emanated from the very back of the truck, where Toby, Osmond's loyal golden retriever, was secured in his travel crate. Osmond reached back to scratch the dog's ears through the bars. "Easy, boy, we're almost there." As if on cue, the trees began to thin, and a small clearing emerged from the green twilight of the forest. Layla let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding and eased the truck to a stop. A worn wooden sign, half hidden by encroaching vegetation, read, "Whispering Woods Campground, Willamette National Forest." The group piled out of the vehicle, stretching their legs and taking in their surroundings. The clearing was smaller than Layla remembered, barely large enough for their truck and the 2 tents they'd brought. The trees that encircled them seemed impossibly tall, their uppermost branches disappearing into the darkening sky. "It's different," Meg said softly, her eyes darting nervously from tree to tree. "More wild, untamed." Alexa snorted, finally pocketing her useless phone. "What did you expect? The Forest Service has been underfunded for years. They probably haven't maintained this place since we were last here. Come on, let's get set up before it gets too dark." As they began unloading their gear, Layla couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt heavier here, almost oppressive. The usual sounds of the forest, chirping birds, rustling leaves, the scurrying of small animals, seemed muted, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Osmond must have sensed her unease. He approached her as she was struggling with one of the tent poles, his face a mask of concern. "Everything okay, Layla? You seem tense." She forced a smile, not wanting to dampen the mood of their long-awaited reunion trip. "I'm fine. Just tired from the drive, I guess, and maybe a little spooked by how different everything looks." Osmond nodded, but his eyes lingered on her face for a moment longer. "If you say so. But remember, we're all in this together. If anything's bothering you, you can talk to us." Layla appreciated his concern, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what was bothering her. It was just a feeling, a vague sense of wrongness that she couldn't shake. She pushed it aside, focusing instead on getting their campsite set up. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the trees, they finally had both tents erected and a small fire crackling in the pit. The flames cast long, dancing shadows across the clearing, and for a moment, Layla could almost convince herself that this was just like old times, 4 friends on an adventure, with nothing to worry about but ghost stories and running out of marshmallows. But as they gathered around the fire, passing around a bag of chips and recounting old memories, Layla couldn't help but notice how the shadows at the edge of their campsite seemed to deepen and shift. More than once, she caught herself staring into the darkness beyond the firelight, certain she had seen something move. The crackling of the campfire filled the air as the group huddled closer, their laughter echoing through the clearing. Layla found herself relaxing slightly, the familiar banter of her friends pushing away the unease that had been gnawing at her since their arrival. "Remember that time Osmond got his foot stuck in that old tree root?" Alexa snickered, pointing her marshmallow stick accusingly at their friend. "He screamed like a little girl." Osmond rolled his eyes, but a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Hey, I thought it was a snake. Anyone would have screamed." "A snake?" Meg teased, nudging him with her elbow. "In Oregon? You're lucky we didn't leave you behind for being so—" Her words were cut short by a long, mournful howl that echoed through the trees. It was unlike anything Layla had ever heard before. Not quite wolf, not quite human, but something in between that sent shivers down her spine. Toby, who had been contentedly gnawing on a stick at Osmond's feet, suddenly stood up, his hackles raised. He let out a low growl, staring intently into the darkness beyond their camp. "What was that?" Alexa whispered, her usual bravado faltering for the first time since they'd arrived. Osmond stood up slowly, one hand resting reassuringly on Toby's head. "Probably just a coyote or something, nothing to worry about." But as he spoke, the howl came again, closer this time. And in the flickering firelight, Layla could have sworn she saw a pair of eyes watching them from the shadows. "That's no coyote," Meg said, her voice trembling. "It sounds bigger." Layla tried to keep her voice steady as she spoke. "Maybe it's a wolf? I heard they were reintroducing them to some parts of Oregon." "Not in this part of the state," Osmond replied, his brow furrowed. "And definitely not this close to a campground. Something's not right." As if to punctuate his words, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, causing the fire to flicker wildly. For a moment the shadows seemed to come alive, dancing and reaching towards them with spectral fingers. "Okay, this is getting creepy," Alexa said, standing up and brushing off her jeans. "I'm going to go grab my flashlight from the tent. We should probably make sure everything's secured for the night." As Alexa made her way to the tent, Layla couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She scanned the tree line, trying to pierce the darkness beyond their small circle of light. That's when she noticed something odd. "Guys," she said slowly, "does anyone else see that?" She pointed to a spot between two massive Douglas firs. There, barely visible in the gloom, was what looked like a crude symbol carved into the bark. It was hard to make out in the flickering firelight, but it seemed to be a circle with a jagged line running through it. Osmond squinted in the direction she was pointing. "I don't see anything. Are you sure?" He was interrupted by a scream from the direction of the tents. It was Alexa's voice, high and terrified. "Oh my God! Guys, come here, you need to see this." They rushed over to find Alexa standing in front of her open backpack, her face pale in the beam of her flashlight. The contents of her bag were strewn about, as if something had been rummaging through it. "I didn't do this," she said, her voice shaking. "And look." She pointed her flashlight at the side of the tent. There, scratched into the fabric, was the same symbol Layla had seen on the tree, a circle with a jagged line through it. "What the hell is going on?" Osmond muttered, his usual calm demeanor cracking. Before anyone could respond, another howl echoed through the forest, closer than ever. Toby barked in response, straining against Osmond's grip on his collar. "We need to get out of here," Meg said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now." But as they turned towards the truck, they realized with growing horror that their escape might not be so simple. In the dirt next to the vehicle were a set of massive, oddly shaped footprints. They led from the forest, circled the truck once, and then disappeared back into the woods. Those, those weren't there when we arrived, Layla said, her heart pounding in her chest. The group stood frozen, the weight of their situation settling over them like a heavy blanket. They were miles from civilization, with no cell service, and something unknown was out there in the darkness, watching and waiting. As another gust of wind whipped through the clearing, carrying with it what sounded like whispered words in an unknown language, Layla realized that their reunion trip had taken a turn into territory far more dangerous and mysterious than any of them could have imagined. The whispering woods were living up to their name, and the night was far from over. The group huddled close together near their truck, the once comforting glow of their campfire now seeming woefully inadequate against the pressing darkness of the forest. Layla's mind raced, trying to make sense of the strange events unfolding around them. "We need to think this through logically," Osmond said, his voice low and steady despite the tension evident in his posture. "There has to be a rational explanation for all of this." Meg let out a nervous laugh. "Rational? Osmond, there are giant footprints circling our truck and weird symbols carved into our tent. What part of that is rational?" "It could be a prank," Alexa suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe some local kids heard we were camping here and decided to scare us." Layla shook her head. "In the middle of nowhere? And how would they know we were here? We didn't tell anyone about this trip except our families." A twig snapped in the darkness beyond their campsite, causing everyone to jump. Toby let out a low growl, his eyes fixed on the tree line. "Whatever it is, it's still out there," Layla whispered. Osmond took a deep breath, visibly trying to calm himself. "Okay, let's think about this. The howl we heard, it could have been a wolf, right? Maybe one that's adapted to live in this area." "But you said there weren't wolves in this part of Oregon," Meg countered. "Official reports might not be up to date," Osmond reasoned. "Animals migrate, adapt. It's possible a wolf pack has moved into the area recently." As they discussed the possibilities, Layla's eyes were drawn to the edge of the firelight. For a moment she thought she saw something move, a large, shadowy figure that seemed to shift and change shape as it moved between the trees. She blinked, and it was gone. "Did anyone else see that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The others turned to look, but the forest beyond their camp was still and silent. "See what?" Alexa asked, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness but revealing nothing unusual. Layla hesitated. "I thought I saw something, like a large animal, but—" She trailed off, unsure how to describe the strange, shifting quality of the figure she'd glimpsed. Meg's eyes widened. "You don't think it could be, one of those creatures from the old stories, do you? The ones that can change between human and animal?" "A werewolf?" Alexa scoffed, but there was a tremor in her voice. "Come on, Meg, those are just legends." "Every legend has a kernel of truth," Osmond mused, his academic interest seemingly overriding his fear for a moment. "Many cultures have stories of shapeshifters or people who can take on animal forms. In the Pacific Northwest, there are Native American legends of skinwalkers and other supernatural beings." "This isn't helping, Osmond," Layla said, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. "We need to figure out what to do. Should we try to leave?" Before anyone could respond, another howl echoed through the forest. This time it was answered by several others, coming from different directions. The group instinctively drew closer together. "It sounds like there's more than one," Meg whispered, her face pale in the firelight. "Pack animals," Osmond nodded. "That's consistent with wolf behavior. But something about those howls, they don't sound quite right." Layla knew what he meant. The howls were deeper, more guttural than any wolf she'd heard before, and there was something else, an almost human quality to them that sent shivers down her spine. "Look!" Alexa suddenly exclaimed, pointing towards the tree line. There, just visible in the moonlight that filtered through the canopy, was a set of eyes reflecting the light. They were too high off the ground to belong to a normal wolf, and as they watched, the eyes blinked and seemed to shift position, as if the creature they belonged to was standing up on its hind legs. For a long moment, the group stood frozen, staring at those eerie eyes. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone, leaving behind only the rustling of leaves and another distant howl. "We need to get out of here," Layla said, her voice shaking. "Now." But as they turned towards the truck, they realized their situation had gotten even more dire. The vehicle's tires were flat, long gashes visible in the rubber. "No, no, no," Alexa muttered, running her hands through her hair. "This can't be happening." Osmond knelt down to examine the damage. "These cuts, they look like claw marks, but they're huge, and the pattern is all wrong for any animal I know." The implications of his words hung heavy in the air. Whatever was out there in the forest, it was intelligent enough to disable their only means of escape, and it was unlike anything they had encountered before. As the group huddled together trying to come up with a plan, Layla couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, hunted. The Whispering Woods had turned into a trap, and they were the prey. But the question remained, what exactly was hunting them? And more importantly, how were they going to survive the night? The wind picked up, carrying with it the sound of rustling leaves and what seemed like distant, inhuman laughter. The long night in the Whispering Woods was far from over. The realization that they were trapped in the clearing with flat tires and unknown dangers lurking in the surrounding forest hit the group hard. Layla could see the panic rising in her friend's eyes, and she knew she had to act fast to keep everyone calm. "Okay, we need to think this through," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "We can't leave right now, so we need to focus on staying safe until morning." Osmond nodded, visibly collecting himself. "You're right. We should secure the campsite as best we can. There's some emergency supplies in the truck, flares, a first aid kit, maybe even a spare tire." "A spare tire won't help much if whatever is out there decides to slash it too," Alexa muttered, but she moved to help Osmond check the truck supplies. Meg, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Guys, I just remembered something. When we were setting up camp earlier, I saw an old trail marker. I think there might be a ranger station a few miles from here." This news brought a glimmer of hope to the group. Layla turned to Meg. "Are you sure? Do you remember which direction?" Meg nodded hesitantly. "I think so. It was to the east, I'm pretty sure. But—" she trailed off, glancing nervously at the dark forest. "But we'd have to go through the woods," Layla finished for her. The idea of venturing into the forest, where whatever had been stalking them was hiding, sent a chill down her spine. "We can't split up," Osmond said firmly. "That's the worst thing we could do in this situation. If we go, we all go together." As they debated their options, a new sound cut through the night. A long, low moan that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was followed by what sounded like words in a language none of them recognized, carried on the wind. Toby whimpered and pressed closer to Osmond's legs. Even the loyal dog seemed unnerved by the strange occurrences. "Did you hear that?" Alexa whispered, her eyes wide. "It sounded like it was talking." Layla shook her head, trying to clear it. "It's just the wind playing tricks on us. We're all scared, and our minds are making things up." But even as she said it, she wasn't sure she believed it. The moaning sound came again, louder this time, and with it came a sudden drop in temperature. Layla could see her breath misting in the air, despite it being a warm summer night just moments ago. "This isn't natural," Meg said, her voice shaking. "We need to get out of here. Now." The urgency in Meg's voice seemed to galvanize the group. They quickly gathered what supplies they could from the truck: flashlights, water bottles, energy bars, and a small hatchet that Osmond had brought for chopping firewood. As they prepared to leave, Layla noticed something that made her blood run cold. The strange symbol they had seen earlier, The circle with the jagged line was now scratched into the dirt near their campfire. It hadn't been there minutes ago, she was sure of it. "Guys," she said, pointing to the symbol, "look." The others gathered around, staring at the freshly drawn symbol with a mixture of fear and confusion. "How?" Alexa started, but she was cut off by another howl, closer than ever before. "We need to go now," Osmond said, his voice tight with tension. With one last look at their abandoned campsite, the group set off into the dark forest, Meg leading the way towards where she remembered seeing the trail marker. Layla brought up the rear, constantly glancing behind them, unable to shake the feeling that they were being followed. As they moved deeper into the woods, the trees seemed to press in around them, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers in the beam of their flashlights. The strange moaning sound continued, rising and falling like some bizarre, otherworldly song. Suddenly, Toby stopped in his tracks, his hackles raised. A low growl rumbled in his throat as he stared intently into the darkness ahead. "What is it, boy?" Osmond whispered, straining to see what had caught the dog's attention. For a moment, all was still. Then, in a flash of movement, something large darted between the trees ahead of them. In the brief moment it was visible, Layla caught a glimpse of matted fur, unnaturally long limbs, and gleaming eyes that seemed to glow with an inner light. A collective gasp went up from the group. Whatever they had just seen, it was clear that it was no ordinary forest animal. "Run!" Layla shouted, and without hesitation the group broke into a sprint. They crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at their faces as they ran. Behind them they could hear the sound of pursuit, heavy footfalls and the snapping of twigs. The howling grew louder, joined by others, surrounding them on all sides. As they ran, Layla's mind raced. What were these creatures? Why were they being hunted? And most importantly, how were they going to survive this night in the Whispering Woods? The forest around them seemed alive with malevolent energy, the very trees appearing to shift and move in the corners of their vision. The line between reality and nightmare was blurring, and Layla realized that their ordeal in the Whispering Woods was far from over. The group crashed through the underbrush, their lungs burning as they gasped for air. The sounds of pursuit were all around them, snapping twigs, rustling leaves, and the occasional otherworldly howl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "This way," Meg shouted, veering suddenly to the left. The others followed without question, too focused on escape to worry about direction. Suddenly, Layla's foot caught on an exposed root, sending her tumbling to the forest floor. Pain shot through her ankle as she tried to stand. "Layla," Osmond called out, doubling back to help her up. "Are you okay?" She gritted her teeth against the pain. "I think I've twisted my ankle, but we can't stop. They're still coming." As if in response to her words, a chilling howl echoed through the trees, closer than ever. Osmond made a quick decision. "Alexa, Meg, keep going. Follow the trail to the ranger station. We'll catch up." Alexa hesitated for a moment, but another howl spurred her into action. She grabbed Meg's hand, and they disappeared into the darkness ahead. Osmond helped Layla to her feet, supporting her weight as they moved as quickly as they could through the forest. Toby stayed close, his ears pricked for any sign of danger. As they stumbled along, Layla noticed something strange. The forest around them had changed. The trees seemed older, more gnarled, their branches reaching out like clawed hands. Strange symbols, similar to the one they'd seen at the campsite, were carved into the bark of several trees. "Osmond," she whispered, "look at the trees. Have you ever seen anything like this?" He shook his head, his face pale in the dim moonlight filtering through the canopy. "Never. It's like we've wandered into a different part of the forest entirely." A twig snapped behind them, and they froze. Slowly they turned to look back the way they had come. There, half hidden in the shadows, stood a figure. It was tall, far taller than any man, with a body that seemed to shift and change as they watched. One moment it appeared almost human, the next more like a wolf standing on its hind legs. but its eyes remained constant, glowing with an eerie, intelligent light. Toby let out a low growl, positioning himself between the creature and his human companions. "Don't move," Osmond breathed, his grip on Layla's arm tightening. For what felt like an eternity, they stood frozen, locked in a silent standoff with the creature. Then, to their amazement, it spoke. The words were unlike any language Layla had ever heard, guttural and ancient-sounding, yet somehow she felt she could almost understand them, as if the meaning was hovering just at the edge of her comprehension. Suddenly, Toby barked sharply, breaking the spell. The creature's form seemed to ripple, and in the blink of an eye it had vanished into the shadows. What was that?" Layla gasped, her heart pounding. Osmond shook his head at a loss for words. "I don't know, but we need to keep moving. Can you walk?" Layla tested her ankle. The pain was still there, but manageable. "I think so. But Osmond, that thing, it spoke, and I almost understood it. How is that possible?" Before he could respond, a new sound reached their ears. It was faint but unmistakable. Voices, human voices. "Hello, is someone there?" a man's voice called out. "We heard shouting." Relief flooded through Layla. "Over here," she called back. "We need help." Moments later, the beam of a powerful flashlight cut through the darkness, and two figures emerged from the trees. They were dressed in the uniform of forest rangers. "Are you folks all right?" the first ranger asked, taking in their disheveled appearance. "We've been getting reports of strange noises in this area all night." As Osmond quickly explained their situation, Layla couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The rangers seemed too calm, given the circumstances. And was it her imagination, or did their eyes seem to glint strangely in the flashlight beam? "Don't worry," the second ranger said, his voice oddly soothing. "You're safe now. We'll take you somewhere secure." As they followed the rangers through the forest, Layla's sense of unease grew. The trees around them were changing again, becoming even more twisted and ancient-looking. And carved into nearly every trunk was that same strange symbol, a circle with a jagged line through it. She glanced at Osmond and saw her own confusion and fear mirrored in his eyes. What had they stumbled into? And more importantly, were these rangers really here to help them, or were they walking into an even greater danger? The forest seemed to close in around them as they walked deeper into the heart of the whispering woods, the shadows growing darker and more oppressive with each step. Layla couldn't shake the feeling that they were being led not to safety, but to the very center of the mystery that had ensnared them. As they approached a clearing ahead, Layla saw a structure taking shape in the gloom, an old, weathered cabin that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. The rangers led them towards it with purposeful strides. "Welcome," the first ranger said, turning to them with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, "to the true heart of the Whispering Woods." The rangers led Layla, Osmond, and Toby towards the old cabin. With each step, Layla's sense of unease grew. There was something off about the way the rangers moved. Their movements were more fluid and graceful than seemed natural. As they reached the cabin's door, the first ranger paused and looked at them with gleaming eyes. "Before we enter, you should know that what you're about to see may challenge everything you believe about this world." Osmond tightened his grip on Layla's arm. "What do you mean? Who are you really?" The second ranger smiled, and in the dim light Layla could have sworn she saw his teeth elongate into sharp points. "We are the guardians of this forest, and of secrets far older than your civilization." Before either Layla or Osmond could respond, the cabin door swung open of its own accord. A warm golden light spilled out, along with the scent of herbs and old wood. Despite her fear, Layla felt an inexplicable pull towards the interior. They stepped inside and Layla gasped. The cabin's interior was far larger than its exterior suggested, impossibly so. Bookshelves lined the walls filled with ancient tomes. Strange artifacts and symbols decorated every surface, and in the center of the room stood a large circular table covered in intricate carvings. "Welcome," a voice said, and they turned to see an elderly man emerging from a back room. His eyes held the same eerie glow as the Ranger's. "I've been expecting you." "Who are you?" Layla managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. The old man smiled kindly. "I have many names, but you can call me Keeper. I watch over this forest and the secrets it holds." Osmond stepped forward, his scientific curiosity momentarily overriding his fear. "What secrets? What's going on here?" The Keeper gestured towards the table. "Come sit. Your friends will join us soon. There's much to explain." As if on cue, the cabin door burst open again, and Alexa and Meg stumbled in, looking disheveled and terrified. Behind them came two more Ranger-like figures. "Layla, Osmond," Meg cried out in relief. "You're okay." As the group reunited, the Keeper waited patiently. Once they had all settled around the table, he began to speak. "The Whispering Woods are more than just a forest. They are a nexus point, a place where the veil between worlds grows thin. The creatures you encountered, the ones you might call werewolves, are but one of many beings that inhabit this liminal space." Alexa scoffed, though her voice trembled. "Werewolves? Nexus points? This is insane." The Keeper's eyes flashed. "Is it? You've seen things tonight that defy explanation. The world is far stranger and more wonderful than you've been led to believe." He waved his hand over the table, and suddenly the carvings began to move and shift, forming images that played out like a movie. They saw glimpses of ancient rituals, of creatures half man and half beast, of doors opening between worlds. "For centuries my order has protected this place," the Keeper continued. "We maintain the balance between worlds and ensure that the secrets of the Whispering Woods do not fall into the wrong hands." Layla leaned forward, mesmerized by the images. "But why us? Why were we chased?" The Keeper's expression grew serious. "Because you, Layla, are special. You carry the blood of the ancient guardians. Your presence here has awakened old magics and old dangers." Layla's mind reeled. "What? But that's impossible. I'm just me." "The symbol you saw," the Keeper said, tracing the circle with the jagged line in the air, where it glowed for a moment before fading. "It's the mark of the guardians. You were drawn here because it's time for you to take your place among us." Osmond stood up abruptly. "This is crazy. Layla, we need to leave, now." But as he spoke, a howl pierced the night outside. The Keeper's expression grew grim. "I'm afraid it's too late for that. The hunt has begun." "The hunt?" Meg asked, her voice quavering. "An ancient rite," one of the Ranger Guardians explained. "When the old magics awaken, it draws beings from many worlds. Some come to protect, others to destroy or conquer." The Keeper turned to Layla. "You have a choice to make, child. Embrace your heritage and help us protect this place, or try to run. But know that if you run, the hunt will never stop pursuing you." Layla looked at her friends, seeing the fear and confusion in their eyes. She thought of the strange connection she had felt to the forest, the way she had almost understood the creature's language. Could it all be true? Before she could respond, the cabin shook with a tremendous impact. Snarls and howls filled the air outside, along with other, more alien sounds. "They're here," the Keeper said grimly. "The choice is yours, Layla, but you must decide quickly." Layla stood, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "I don't fully understand what's happening, but I know we can't run forever. If I can help, I will." The Keeper nodded approvingly and handed her an amulet, a silver disc emblazoned with the Guardian symbol. "Then let the trial of the hunt begin. Your friends will be safe here, but you must face this challenge alone." Osmond grabbed Layla's arm. "You can't be serious. This is madness." Layla looked at him, then at Meg and Alexa. "I have to do this. Somehow I know it's right." She turned to the Keeper. What do I need to do? Step outside and face the hunt, the keeper said. Let your instincts guide you. Remember, you are of two worlds now. That is your strength. With a deep breath, Layla moved towards the door. As she gripped the handle, she looked back at her friends one last time. I'll come back, I promise. Then she stepped out into the night, into a world of magic and danger she was only beginning to understand. The moment Layla stepped outside, the world seemed to shift around her. The forest was alive with movement and sound, shadows darting between trees and eerie lights flickering in the distance. The amulet around her neck pulsed with warmth, and she felt a surge of energy course through her body. A chorus of howls rose from the darkness, and Layla saw them, the wolf-like creatures that had been chasing them. But now, seeing them with her awakened senses, she realized they were far more than simple animals. Their forms shifted and changed, sometimes appearing almost human, other times fully bestial. One of the creatures, larger than the rest, stepped forward. When it spoke, Layla was shocked to find she could understand its guttural language. Child of two worlds, it growled. You do not belong here. This is not your hunt. Layla stood her ground, drawing strength from the amulet and some deep hidden part of herself. I may not have known about this world until today, but I am here now. I choose to stand with the guardians. The creature snarled, baring sharp teeth. Then prove your worth. Survive the hunt and we will acknowledge your claim. Fail and your blood will feed the forest. Without warning, the creature lunged at her. Layla's body moved on instinct, dodging with a speed and grace she never knew she possessed. As she moved, the forest seemed to respond to her, branches reaching out to block her pursuers, roots rising to trip them. Layla ran deeper into the woods, the pack of hunters close behind. She could feel the magic of the forest pulsing around her, and somehow she knew she could tap into it. Focusing on that energy, she managed to blur her form, making it harder for the hunters to track her. As she ran, Layla began to understand the true nature of the trial. It wasn't just about escaping the hunters. It was about proving her connection to the forest, her ability to navigate between worlds. She came to a clearing where the veil between worlds seemed particularly thin. Shimmering portals flickered in and out of existence, offering glimpses of strange alien landscapes. The hunters were closing in, but Layla saw her opportunity. With a deep breath, she focused on the energy of the amulet and her own awakening power. She leaped through one of the portals just as it was about to close. Layla found herself in a twisted version of the forest, where the trees were made of crystal and the sky burned with ethereal fire. She could hear the hunters crashing through the portal behind her, their howls distorted in this strange realm. For what felt like hours, Layla navigated through a series of these otherworldly domains, always staying one step ahead of the hunt. She crossed fields of living shadows, swam through rivers of liquid starlight, and climbed mountains that defied the laws of physics. With each world she traversed, Layla felt her connection to the magic growing stronger. She learned to manipulate the energy around her, using it to boost her speed, create illusions, and even briefly take on aspects of the creatures she encountered. Finally, exhausted but exhilarated, Layla found a portal that led back to her own world. She emerged into the whispering woods near the cabin where her friends waited. The hunters burst out behind her, but now they kept their distance, watching her with a mixture of wariness and respect. The leader of the pack approached, its form stabilizing into something between wolf and man. "You have survived the hunt," it said, its voice grudgingly respectful. "You have proven your connection to the worlds beyond. We acknowledge your right to stand with the guardians." Layla stood tall, feeling the power of the forest thrumming through her veins. "Thank you," she said. "I hope we can work together to protect this place." The creature nodded once, then melted back into the shadows with its pack. As they disappeared, Layla heard the keeper's voice behind her. "Well done, young guardian," he said, smiling proudly. You have passed the trial and taken the first step on a grand journey. Layla turned to see not only the keeper but her friends as well, watching her with awe and confusion. Osmond stepped forward. Layla, what happened out there? You were gone for hours, and we saw impossible things. Layla smiled tiredly. It's a long story, Osmond. One I'm still trying to understand myself. The keeper placed a hand on her shoulder. Come, all of you. It's time we had a proper talk about the future and the role you each have to play in it. As they walked back to the cabin, Layla looked at her friends. I know this is all insane and scary, she said, but I promise I'll explain everything as best I can. We're in this together, whatever happens next. Meg, Alexa, and Osmond exchanged glances, then nodded. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it as a team. The next few days were a whirlwind of revelations and adjustments. The keeper and his fellow guardians explained the true nature of the Whispering Woods and the vital role it played in maintaining the balance between worlds. Layla threw herself into learning about her newfound abilities and responsibilities. She discovered that her guardian heritage gave her a natural affinity for magic, allowing her to tap into the forest's energy and even communicate with some of its otherworldly inhabitants. Her friends, though initially overwhelmed, soon found their own ways to contribute. Osmond's scientific mind proved invaluable in understanding the complex interactions between different realms. Meg's artistic talents allowed her to document and illustrate the various creatures and phenomena they encountered. Alexa's adventurous spirit and quick thinking made her an excellent scout and strategist. Even Toby had a role to play. The loyal dog seemed to have developed a sixth sense for detecting otherworldly presences, becoming an early warning system for the team. As the days passed, the group faced numerous challenges. They helped the Guardians seal breaches between worlds, negotiated treaties with some of the more amenable otherworldly beings, and fended off those who sought to exploit the forest's power. One morning, about a week after their arrival, the keeper called them all together. You've done remarkably well, he said, his eyes twinkling with pride. But now you face a choice. You can return to your old lives with the knowledge that this world exists but no obligation to it, or you can join us as full guardians of the Whispering Woods. The friends exchanged glances. It was Layla who spoke first. I don't think I could go back to a normal life now, knowing what I know, she said. I want to stay and continue learning, to protect this place and all the wonders it contains. Osmond nodded. I agree. There's so much here to discover, so many scientific principles to unravel. I want to be part of that. Count me in, Alexa grinned. This is the greatest adventure I could have ever imagined. Meg hesitated for a moment, then smiled. Someone needs to document all of this. I'll stay too. The keeper beamed at them. I had hoped you would say that. Very well, let us make it official. He led them to a sacred grove deep in the heart of the forest. There, under the light of a full moon, they took their oaths as guardians of the Whispering Woods. As Layla recited the ancient words, she felt the forest's magic surge through her. She saw flashes of the challenges that lay ahead, dark forces that would try to breach the boundaries between worlds, difficult choices that would test her resolve, wonders beyond imagination waiting to be discovered. But she also saw the strength of the bonds she had forged, with her friends, with the forest, and with the vast, intricate web of reality they now helped to protect. Whatever came, they would face it together. As the ceremony concluded, the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees. Layla looked at her friends, now fellow guardians, and smiled. Their ordinary camping trip had led them on an extraordinary journey. In 1963, a strange letter arrived at the San Francisco Police Department in America. The writer claimed to be the mastermind behind the famous escape from Alcatraz prison an event that had shaken American security a year earlier. The writer expressed his willingness to surrender and reveal all details on the condition of receiving appropriate medical treatment, as he had reached nearly 80 years of age. Surprisingly, the American police, after just 1 hour, issued an official statement accepting the offer, confirming their readiness to provide the best possible medical care. However, the escaped prisoner never contacted them again, as if he was playing with their nerves, or perhaps he passed away before he could fulfill his promise. Thus, the Alcatraz prison escape remained a puzzling mystery, and a legend about the smartest and boldest escape attempt in human history. The place they escaped from was known as Hell, and wasn't just an ordinary prison, but a fortified castle with the strictest security measures. Let's delve into the depths of this amazing story, which contains events and details beyond imagination, emphasizing that everything we will narrate is documented and 100% true. This story led to the closure of the prison and its transformation into a tourist attraction, with a poignant phrase written at its entrance: "On the rock of Alcatraz, dreams of freedom are shattered forever." Alcatraz Prison was established in 1934 and is considered one of the most fortified prisons in human history. Its construction method and precise details in its design were not only to prevent prisoners from escaping, but also to break their morale and psychologically humiliate them. Alcatraz was like a special correctional facility, where its inmates were prisoners who had committed crimes inside other prisons in the United States. When someone commits a crime or violates laws while in another prison, they are transferred to Alcatraz as additional punishment. Imagine what Alcatraz was like: an abandoned island of 22 hectares, 2 kilometers away from San Francisco. Its climate is extremely harsh, surrounded by ice blocks even in summer. In August, the peak of summer, the temperature of the surrounding seawater might reach only 12 degrees Celsius. As for the rest of the year, the water temperature barely exceeds the freezing point. Moreover, there were strong water currents that made swimming impossible. Add to that, American authorities were promoting a rumor that they had released hundreds of sharks and electric eels in the waters surrounding the island. Although this information wasn't true, it aimed to increase fear in the prisoners' hearts and deter them from even thinking about escape. Even if we assume that a prisoner managed to overcome all these obstacles, the island was surrounded by trained snipers who had strict orders to kill any prisoner attempting to escape. As for the design of the prison itself and the guards who worked there, this is another chapter of horror and cruelty. The prison was designed in a way that made it completely exposed, with small cells surrounded by metal walls revealing everything inside. Each cell contained a bed, a sink, and an exposed toilet, and around the clock there were guards patrolling between the cells to monitor prisoners' movements. Leaving the cell was forbidden except for eating or exercise. Mealtime in the prison kitchen was limited to only half an hour, while exercise time in the prison yard did not exceed 6 minutes. Even showering was allowed only once a week. The prisoners themselves were responsible for cleaning, cooking, and maintenance work inside the prison, working in shifts, with each prisoner assigned a specific task. As soon as his task was finished, he would be returned to his cell to stay on his bed without any other activity, to prevent any escape attempt. Alcatraz prison wasn't just a punishment for prisoners, but also a place to discipline guards and police officers with bad reputations. The worst American guards and police were sent to serve there, which made the relationship between prisoners and guards very bad, sometimes reaching the point of torture. The practices inside the prison were so inhumane that the prison's name became synonymous with hell in everyone's view. There was a famous phrase written everywhere in the prison: "On the rock of Alcatraz, your dreams of freedom are shattered." In short, the idea of escaping from prison was an impossible dream. Despite all these strict measures, 14 escape attempts occurred from the prison. All prisoners who tried to escape were executed on the spot, to be a lesson to the rest of the prisoners. To be fair, these prisoners were among the most dangerous criminals. Imagine someone who committed a crime inside another prison to be transferred here. Therefore, we can say that the harshness of treatment was somewhat justified. Now, after explaining the prison conditions in detail, let's ask, how did these prisoners manage to escape from this fortified place? Let's follow the events step by step, as the story is full of amazing details that surpass imagination. The story began in 1961 with a prisoner named Allen West. Allen was an ordinary prisoner in his 30s, transferred to Alcatraz after getting involved in a fight with several prisoners in San Francisco Central Prison. Some sources indicate that he was transferred to Alcatraz after a failed escape attempt from his previous prison. As soon as he arrived at Alcatraz, the idea of escape never left Allen's mind for a moment. One time, while assigned to clean the roof of the cells, he noticed a refreshing breeze coming from the ceiling. He raised his head to find a large ventilation opening, and surprisingly, the opening was wide enough for a person to pass through. Through it, he could see the sky, which meant it was like a tube connecting the place where he was to the prison roof. Even the metal bars covering this opening were rusty and fragile, meaning they were easy to remove. If he succeeded in that, he would be able to exit through this opening and reach outside the prison. But it wasn't that simple. He needed a team for planning and assistance. Here appears the second person in the plan, Frank Morris, who was 33 years old. Frank was also transferred to Alcatraz after a failed escape attempt from his previous prison. When he was caught, the prison director told him, "I will transfer you to Alcatraz, and I promise you that there you will forget the taste of freedom for the rest of your life." Frank and Allen were neighbors, separated by one wall. As soon as Allen returned from his cleaning task, he told Frank what he had seen, saying it was their chance to escape. Allen was the owner of the idea and the discoverer of the ventilation opening, while Frank was the mastermind behind everything. He planned every detail of this complex plan. Frank was a genius in every sense of the word, with an IQ surpassing 98% of people at 133. The first thing Frank did was to tell Allen about the need to form a team to help them escape. It took 5 days of thinking before he chose the suitable persons, the brothers John and Clarence Anglin. The reason for choosing them was that they were his neighbors, and their cell was adjacent to his, in addition to being brothers in one cell, which makes it easier to give instructions to both of them at the same time. Every night, Frank would sit next to the wall with Allen, discussing the details of the plan. As soon as they finished the discussion, Frank would move to the side of the Anglin brothers' cell to tell them what had been reached and give them the necessary instructions. The first thing Frank asked Allen to do was to conduct a comprehensive survey of the place the next time he would go up to the roof of the cells, to know everything there, and to discover the way that could lead them to the ventilation opening. Indeed, at the first opportunity he had to clean the roof. Allen surveyed the entire place. The surprise was that there was a long corridor behind the cells, about a meter wide, which was a ventilation space between the cells through which the sewage pipe passed. The corridor was abandoned and no one passed through it, and if they could reach it, it would be easy for them to climb to the roof of the cells, and thus reach the ventilation opening and escape from it. The good news was that in each cell there was a small window in the wall, 30 centimeters wide and 20 centimeters high, located under the sink. This window connected the cell to the corridor they discovered. But the window was very small and covered with a perforated piece of metal, making it impossible to pass through. However, Frank had the solution. Frank noticed that the prison walls were very old, over 15 years old. And because of the island's humid climate and the high salinity of the sea, the walls were corroded, making it easy to dig into them. Therefore, he asked the team to smuggle spoons from the kitchen to use in the digging process. Over the course of a full month, Each of them managed to smuggle 2 spoons, one for digging and one as a spare. Indeed, they began to widen the opening. The Anglin brothers used forks in addition to spoons, which helped them enlarge the hole faster. During the digging process, they faced 2 main problems: how to get rid of the cement, dust, and stones resulting from the digging, and how to cover the opening and hide the traces of digging. But before we reveal how they solved these 2 problems, it's important to know something important about the prison routine. They would dig every day at exactly 9 o'clock in the evening. Why this timing specifically? Because at this time, prisoners were allowed to sing and play musical instruments for a full hour. This period was dedicated to entertaining the prisoners and alleviating the gloomy atmosphere they lived in. Although each prisoner was in his cell, they would play a musical piece together and sing in one voice. This scene was so beautiful that the prisoners themselves said that this hour was the only hope that kept them alive. As for Alan, Frank, and the Anglin brothers, as soon as this musical party began, they would start digging. Everyone was busy and happy, and the surveillance wasn't strict at this time, and the sound of singing and playing covered the sound of digging. Their plan was to start the digging process, each in his cell. As for the Anglin brothers, one of them would dig, while the other watched the corridor to monitor the guards. He would use a small mirror to reveal the entire path, and as soon as he spotted a guard coming towards them, he would cough with all his strength. Upon hearing this signal, they would cover the opening with their covers, and each would return to his place. As for how they solved the 2 problems we mentioned earlier, regarding the cement resulting from the digging process, they would throw it from the window openings in the corridor behind the cell. It's worth noting that this digging process continued for more than 6 months, so the quantities that came out with them every day were very small. Don't forget that they were digging with a spoon, and the surveillance on them was very strict. The rate of progress was very slow, and every day there was only slight progress. As for the second problem, which is covering the opening and hiding the traces of digging, this was the task of the genius Frank and John Anglin. These 2 were working in the prison's painting workshop. In the workshop, they made paint the same color as the cell wall. They used newspapers, cardboard, small pieces of stones, and cement to create a model that exactly resembles the shape of the original opening in the wall. Then they painted this model the same color as the wall. Every day, after finishing work, they would cover the large opening with the cardboard model and hang their clothes above the sink in a way that covered this opening completely. And since the guards didn't enter inside the cell, it was impossible for them to suspect anything. In fact, this situation continued for a full year without anyone noticing that what was on the wall was just a cardboard model, and no one suspected that behind this model was an opening through which a human could pass. After about 6 months, the opening was ready. One time, Alan, Frank, and John came out of the openings into the corridor behind the cells. They examined the place and conducted a full study of it. It became clear to them that the matter had become very easy, as once they reached this place, it would be easy for them to reach the ventilation opening. After finishing their exploratory tour, they returned to their rooms to start the second part of the plan. The main problem facing them, which had no clear solution, was how to reach the city if they succeeded in getting out of the prison. It seemed impossible due to the reasons we mentioned at the beginning of the story, such as the cold water, strong water currents, and ice, in addition to the widespread rumors about the presence of sharks and electric eels around the island. Here, Frank told them with all confidence, we will make a boat and life jackets from the raw materials available to us. The idea was good, or let's say it was intuitive, and anyone could have thought of the same idea. But the question is, how? And why was Frank so confident that they would be able to make life jackets and a boat? What no one knew was that Frank had read most of the magazines in the prison. These magazines weren't brought to the prison for prisoners to read, but were used to wrap food or for other purposes such as covering the floor when doing painting work. Any excess magazine in the market would be sent to Alcatraz, and the numbers that arrived sometimes reached 2,000 or 5,000 copies. What was written in the magazine wasn't important, but how it would be used. Frank, in the early period of his stay in prison, worked in the restaurant and then in the painting workshop, but he was reading these magazines passionately. One time he read an article in one of these magazines talking about how to make a boat and life jacket from materials available at home. Since that time, he kept the idea in his mind, sure that it would be useful to him someday. The problem was that Frank didn't remember all the details of the article. Therefore, on his first day of work in the painting workshop, he started looking for that magazine to read the article again. When he finally found it, he tore out the page and hid it with him, then smuggled it to his room. When Alan and the Anglin brothers learned that Frank had smuggled the article, and they now had a way to make the boat, they felt overwhelming joy. It had never occurred to them how they would make a boat for 4 people without anyone noticing. Now the information was at their fingertips, and the raw materials were also available, but the question that kept bothering them was, where would they make this boat without anyone discovering them? Here Frank asked Alan and the brothers to stop the plan for a short period. He told them, "Let me think a little to find a suitable way." One of the distinctive things that helped in the success of their plan was that they were very patient in implementing the plan, and they had great patience. More importantly, Frank's instructions were like orders for everyone. Everyone agreed that Frank was the lifeline and the only way for the plan to succeed. And since he asked them to stop the plan for a while, everyone complied without hesitation. One time, while Frank was sitting in his room, he noticed the prisoners who were cleaning the roof of the cells opposite his cell. He noticed that throughout the cleaning period, there was dense dust and dirt falling down. This was bothering the guards and prisoners alike. Then an idea occurred to him. This is the solution. We will try this idea, and if it works, we will return to complete our plan. On the same day, Frank asked Alan that when he goes up to clean the roof next time, to gather all the dirt and dust on the roof of the cells above Alan's room, that is, at the ventilation opening they will escape from. And as soon as there is a large amount, he should throw all the dirt down. And when any of the prisoners or guards object, he should suggest to the guard to cover this place with old blankets to prevent dust from falling down. Indeed, this is what happened. And the surprise was that the guards agreed to the suggestion, saying, "Cover the place as you wish. The important thing is that dust doesn't fall on us again." When Alan heard this sentence, he almost flew with joy. He went down, brought blankets, and covered an area of 10 meters. Thus they had 10 meters around the ventilation opening covered and not exposed to the guards, which means they had a workshop to work in every day. But here a new problem appeared. How would they leave their rooms and go up to work without anyone noticing them? The solution this time was with Frank and Clarence Anglin. Frank suggested that they make models in the shape of real heads, with natural hair and skin colored. Since John and Frank were working in the painting workshop, they were able to smuggle paper, cardboard, and paint. They mixed the paint to make it skin-colored. They made the model using toilet paper, cardboard, and regular paper, and mixed it with soap, toothpaste, and cement that was left over from the digging process. In this way, they were able to form models that exactly matched the shape of the head, and using the paint they had, they colored the faces to look like real skin. There was only one problem left. Where would they get hair for these models? Here came the role of Clarence Anglin, who worked as a barber in the prison. Clarence would smuggle a large amount of hair into his room every day and share the amount with his brother Alan and Frank. And so their models had real hair, and they could use them as a substitute when they left the cell and went up to the workshop. Every day at the time when the prisoners' musical party began, They would put the artificial heads in their place on the beds, then come out of the ventilation opening to the roof of the rooms and start working. The work was divided into two parts. First, cutting the iron bars that blocked the ventilation opening, and second, manufacturing an inflatable boat and life jackets. The question now, what would they use in making the boat and life jackets? The answer was raincoats. These coats were available in large numbers in the prison, where there were works done by prisoners and guards outside the prison building. And because the area is cold and the climate is volatile, they needed these coats. Frank, even in this matter, had calculated well. He wondered, when are these coats neglected and not used by anyone? Certainly in summer. So he decided that they would make the escape boat in the summer, when these coats would be stored and no one would ask about them. At that time it would be easy to steal them without anyone noticing their disappearance or shortage. Indeed, they managed to steal 50 coats. Over the course of 2 months, as soon as the prisoners started singing, they would put the models on the beds to make it look like they were sleeping, then go up to the roof and start working in the covered area. They would make boats from the coats and cut the iron bars covering the ventilation opening. After 2 months, they finished everything and were able to escape from prison. They chose June 11, 1962, to escape. On the appointed day, precisely at 10 p.m., the guards turned off the prison lights and all the prisoners slept. As for Frank, Alan, and the Anglin brothers, they put the artificial heads in their place and came out of the ventilation openings to the roof of the cells. But something unexpected happened. Alan couldn't get out of his cell. The reason was that the day before, as usual, Alan covered the ventilation opening in his cell with a piece of cardboard. But as a precaution, he put a large amount of cement to keep the cardboard in place so it wouldn't fall. The cement hardened, and the opening became solid, and he couldn't get out of it. There's another account saying that during the boat manufacturing period, Alan wasn't going up to the roof with them to stay and monitor the place and watch out for the guards. And during these 2 months, he gained weight, and it became difficult for him to pass through the ventilation opening to the corridor behind the cells. Of course, his 3 companions told him they would continue with the plan, and he should try to enlarge the opening and get out as soon as possible to catch up with them. As for the others, they climbed to the roof of the cells and entered through the ventilation opening, continuing until they reached the roof of the prison. There, they sneaked down and discovered that there were no snipers or guards, and that all these stories were just rumors. They reached the fence surrounding the prison, which was a metal fence. They cut the fence and got out of it, then reached the beach where they took out the boat and life jackets. They inflated them using a pump they made themselves. The pump was made from an accordion musical instrument, from which they removed the sound part and turned it into a pump. They inflated the boat and life jackets, and waited a little hoping that Alan, the original idea owner, would catch up with them. But they eventually lost hope and got on the boat, continuing their way towards freedom. The next day at 7:30 a.m., the guards began their usual rounds between the cells to check on the prisoners. The guard reached the Anglin brothers' cell and noticed that the 2 were still sleeping. He inserted his baton and hit one of them on the head, only to be surprised by the head falling to the ground. The guard was terrified and took several steps back. They opened the cell door and went inside to discover that the 2 were not there. Ironically, to this day, the models they used and all the tools they used to escape are still in the prison museum, and tourists from all over the world come to see them. As for Alan, when the guards found him, he was sitting on the ground smoking a cigarette, looking very depressed. Alan cooperated fully with the guards and told them everything because he had completely lost hope in life. He even asked the guards to end his life so he could rest. The great irony was that Frank had calculated everything. When they asked Alan about the escapees' destination, he replied that the only person who knew the destination was Frank. He added that when they used to ask Frank about it, he would say that this matter must remain a secret with him alone, so that in case one of them was caught, he couldn't give information about the others. Search teams went out and found no trace of the escapees. Therefore, the prison administration declared that the 3 prisoners had drowned and died in the sea, and that they had succeeded in escaping but could not resist the sea and died before reaching the shore. Of course, this statement wasn't true. The operation succeeded and the police found the life jackets on the beach on the other side. But this statement was aimed at covering up the scandal that occurred in the prison. The American authorities remained silent about the details of the escape operation and how these prisoners managed to get out of the prison for 20 years. Nothing was revealed about how these prisoners escaped. 1 year after the incident, specifically in 1963, a film was produced talking about the gang and how they managed to escape. The strange thing is that most of the events in the film, although true, were obtained by the film writers through illegal methods, and they did not get any information from an official source. The American authorities were strangely reserved about the story, yet the film producers had accurate and correct details. In the same year, the prison was closed, and instead of the phrase that was written at the entrance of the prison, "On the rock of Alcatraz, your dreams of freedom are shattered," they wrote, "Dreams of freedom were shattered on the rock of Alcatraz forever." The prison, after the escape story, became a tourist attraction. In 1975, the Anglin brothers sent a picture of themselves to the American police to prove that they were still alive. And as mentioned earlier, in 2013, Frank Morris, the genius, sent a letter to the police telling them he was ready to turn himself in, but he never contacted them again and disappeared once more. Unfortunately, in this whole story, Allen West was the biggest loser. He was the one who discovered the escape method and helped in planning and implementation, but he couldn't escape. Perhaps this was the only positive thing, because without Allen, no one would have known the details of the plan and how they carried out the smartest escape operation in human history. This story raises many questions about the nature of the penal system and its effectiveness, as well as about the human mind's ability to adapt and create even in the most difficult circumstances. Was the illusion and fear planted by the American authorities what prevented prisoners from attempting to escape in the beginning? Or was Frank Morris truly an exceptional genius who was able to break their system and escape? In the end, the Alcatraz escape story remains one of the most exciting and mysterious escape stories in history, and continues to inspire writers, filmmakers, and history enthusiasts to this day. Years ago, when I was in my prime, I found solace in the great outdoors of California. Camping was my escape, a way to shed the constraints of city life and immerse myself in nature's embrace. Almost every other weekend, I'd pack up my gear and hit the road, seeking new adventures in the wilderness. My love for camping was matched only by my distaste for sleeping on the hard ground. After countless nights of tossing and turning in a tent, I decided to invest in a small camper that attached to the bed of my truck. It was a game changer, a cozy sanctuary that could comfortably accommodate me and a companion if needed. One crisp autumn Friday, I set out on a journey that would forever change my perspective on solo camping. I had chosen a destination about 5 hours from home, a pristine area I had yet to explore. The drive was long but scenic, winding through golden hills and dense forests. As I navigated the twisting roads, my anticipation grew with each passing mile. I arrived at my destination in the early afternoon, eager to make the most of the remaining daylight. The area was breathtaking, a tapestry of towering redwoods, crystal-clear streams, and wildflower-dotted meadows. I parked my truck at a trailhead and set out on a challenging hike, my boots crunching on the leaf-strewn path. The trail snaked its way up a mountain, offering glimpses of the vast wilderness below. I paused often to catch my breath and marvel at the view, feeling a sense of accomplishment with each step. After a few hours of steady climbing, I reached the summit, where I was rewarded with a panoramic vista that stretched for miles in every direction. I sat on a sun-warmed rock, munching on trail mix and drinking in the beauty around me. As the sun began its descent, I made my way back down the mountain, my legs burning pleasantly from the exertion. Near the base of the trail, I stumbled upon a secluded lake, its surface a mirror reflecting the fiery colors of the sunset. Unable to resist, I shed my hiking boots and waded into the cool water, letting it soothe my tired feet. I lingered by the lake until twilight, watching as the first stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky. It was then that I decided to find a spot to camp for the night. I drove my truck up a winding dirt road, searching for the perfect location. After about 20 minutes, I found an ideal clearing, elevated enough to provide a stunning view of the valley below, yet sheltered by a grove of ancient trees. I parked my truck and set about making my home for the night. The camper was a marvel of efficiency, with every inch of space utilized to its fullest. I unfolded the tiny kitchenette and prepared a simple dinner of canned soup and crackers, savoring the taste of a warm meal after a day of physical exertion. As night fell in earnest, I settled into my cozy bed with a paperback novel and a battery-powered lantern. The silence of the wilderness was broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustle of wind through the trees. It was in these moments that I felt most at peace, far removed from the chaos of everyday life. I must have been reading for an hour or so when I first heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching on gravel. At first I dismissed it as my imagination, or perhaps a small animal foraging nearby. But as the sounds grew closer and more distinct, I felt a prickle of unease run down my spine. In all my years of camping, I had rarely encountered other people in such remote locations, especially after dark. I closed my book and held my breath, straining my ears to catch any further sounds. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, circling my truck. My heart began to race as I considered my options. Should I call out, pretend to be asleep, make a run for it? Before I could decide, a raspy voice broke the silence. "Hello there," it called, the words seeming to hang in the still night air. "I just wanted to check out your camper. Pretty nifty." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. The voice sounded male, with an odd, lilting quality that set me on edge. Summoning my courage, I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hi," I said, louder than necessary. "I appreciate your interest, but it's late. I'd be happy to show you the camper in the morning if you're camping nearby." There was no immediate response, just an eerie silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Then I heard muttering, low and indistinct, but clearly coming from just outside my camper. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone sent chills down my spine. I tried to return to my book, hoping that whoever was out there would take the hint and leave, but the footsteps didn't retreat. Instead, they began to move around my truck, slow and purposeful. I could hear them crunching on the gravel, pausing occasionally before continuing their circuit. My camper had small porthole-like windows on each side, covered with curtains for privacy. With trembling hands, I peeled back one of the curtains just a fraction, peering out into the darkness. The moon had risen, casting a pale light over the clearing, but I couldn't see anyone. The footsteps had moved to the front of my truck, out of my line of sight. I was debating whether to turn on my exterior lights when I heard it, a soft thump on the hood of my truck. My blood ran cold as I realized what was happening. Whoever was out there had climbed onto my vehicle and was now crawling across the roof towards the camper. Anger flared within me, momentarily overshadowing my fear. I took pride in my truck, meticulously maintaining it, and the thought of some stranger damaging it infuriated me. Without thinking, I shouted out, my voice echoing in the quiet night. "Hey, I have a firearm in here," I warned, trying to sound more confident than I felt. If you don't get off my truck and leave right now, I'm coming out with my gun." The thumping on the roof ceased immediately, followed by the sound of someone scrambling off the vehicle. I heard footsteps retreating, but they didn't fade away completely. Whoever it was hadn't left the area. My heart pounding, I reached for the small safe where I kept my firearm. With shaking hands, I entered the combination and retrieved the gun, along with a powerful flashlight. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I might find outside. Slowly, I opened the camper door and climbed out, my eyes darting around the clearing. I swept the flashlight in a wide arc, its beam cutting through the darkness. At first, I saw nothing but trees and underbrush. Then a movement caught my eye. About 40 feet away, crouched near a large bush, was a figure. As my flashlight illuminated him, I caught a glimpse of wild eyes and unkempt hair before he backed further into the shadows. Was this some drug-addled wanderer, a dangerous criminal, or simply a lost soul with no sense of boundaries? Regardless of his reasons, I had had enough. "Leave now," I shouted, my voice carrying across the clearing. "Don't come back or I'll call the authorities." The figure retreated further into the darkness, but I could still sense his presence. He hadn't gone far. A wave of exhaustion washed over me as the adrenaline began to subside. I was supposed to drive home in the morning anyway, and there was no way I could sleep peacefully here now. With one eye always on the surrounding forest, I quickly packed up my belongings and secured the camper. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig made me jump. As I climbed into the driver's seat, I caught movement in my peripheral vision, the figure still lurking at the edge of the clearing. I started the engine, its rumble shattering the night silence. As I began to drive away, my headlights swept across the area where I had last seen the man. For a brief moment I saw him clearly, gaunt face, matted beard, clothes hanging in tatters. But it was his eyes that haunted me, wide and gleaming with an unsettling intensity. As I navigated the winding road back to civilization, my mind raced with questions. Who was that man? What did he want? What might have happened if I hadn't been prepared? The what-ifs plagued me for miles, until the first signs of dawn began to lighten the sky. I stopped at a 24-hour diner just off the highway, desperately in need of coffee and a moment to collect myself. As I sat in a worn vinyl booth, hands wrapped around a steaming mug, I reflected on the night's events. The encounter had shaken me, but it had also reinforced the importance of being prepared and trusting one's instincts. In the years that followed, I continued to camp, but never again with the same carefree attitude. I became more cautious, more aware of my surroundings. I invested in better security measures for my camper and always made sure someone knew my exact location and expected return time. That night in the California wilderness taught me a valuable lesson about the unpredictability of human nature and the importance of self-reliance. While I never again encountered anything quite as unsettling, the memory of those footsteps in the dark, that raspy voice, and those gleaming eyes stayed with me. As I sit here now, years removed from that night, I can't help but wonder about the man in the forest. Was he simply a lonely soul seeking connection in all the wrong ways? Or was there something more sinister at play? I'll never know for certain, but I'm grateful for the wake-up call it provided. For those who venture into the wilderness, whether for a weekend or a lifetime, remember this. Nature's beauty is unparalleled, but it's not without its dangers, both natural and human. Stay alert, trust your instincts, and always be prepared. The wilderness can be a place of solace and adventure, but it demands respect and caution in equal measure. As for me, while I may not camp as frequently as I once did, I still find solace in nature. But now when I gaze up at the star-filled sky or listen to the wind whisper through the trees, I do so with a heightened awareness of the thin line between solitude and isolation, between peace and vulnerability. That night in California may have changed me, but it didn't break my spirit or my love for the outdoors. Instead, it taught me to appreciate the beauty around me while never forgetting the importance of vigilance. And in the end, isn't that what true wilderness experience is all about? Finding the balance between awe and awareness, between freedom and caution? So to all the solo campers out there, I say this: embrace the adventure, revel in the solitude, but never forget that in the vast wilderness, you are not always alone. And sometimes, it's the unseen presence that leaves the most lasting impression. Our journey began on a warm summer morning, the sun barely peeking over the horizon as my friend and I packed our bicycles with the essentials for our trip. We had meticulously planned our route, focusing on bike trails that would lead us through picturesque landscapes and quaint towns. Our panniers were filled with camping gear, clothes, and enough food to sustain us for several days of hard riding. The first day of our journey was filled with excitement and anticipation. We pedaled along winding trails, surrounded by lush greenery and the occasional glimpse of wildlife. The rhythmic sound of our bike tires on the path and the chirping of birds created a soothing backdrop to our adventure. We chatted intermittently, discussing our hopes for the trip and the sights we expected to see. As the day wore on, our muscles began to ache, but we pushed forward, determined to reach our planned stopping point. By late afternoon, we found ourselves at the edge of a small town, where we decided to rest for the night. With no official campgrounds nearby, we scouted the area and found a secluded spot in a local park. We set up our tent discreetly, cooked a simple meal of beans and bread on our portable stove, and fell into an exhausted sleep. The second day brought new challenges. The terrain became more undulating, testing our endurance as we tackled steep inclines and enjoyed thrilling descents. We passed through several small communities, stopping occasionally to refill our water bottles and stretch our legs. The weather remained favorable, with a gentle breeze keeping us cool as we rode. As evening approached on the second day, we found ourselves without an ideal camping spot. After some deliberation, we made the unconventional decision to set up camp in a quiet corner of a cemetery. It wasn't our first choice, but it offered a flat, secluded area away from the main road. We treated the space with utmost respect, careful not to disturb any graves or memorial items. The third day of our journey was when we finally reached our destination. The small town welcomed us with its charming streets and friendly atmosphere. After days of physical exertion and basic meals, we were eager to indulge in some comfort and relaxation. We spent the afternoon by the town's lake, relishing the cool water against our sun-warmed skin. The swim was refreshing, washing away the dust and fatigue of our journey. As we floated on our backs, gazing at the clear blue sky, we reflected on the miles we had covered and the sights we had seen. That evening, we treated ourselves to a hearty meal at a local restaurant. The taste of fresh, hot food was a welcome change from our camp cuisine. We savored every bite, recounting our adventures to each other and planning the return journey. As night fell, we faced the question of where to spend our final night before heading home. Given our previous experience, we decided to return to the cemetery we had passed on our way into town. It was quiet, away from the bustle of the main street, and offered a soft area of mulch that seemed perfect for our tent. We set up camp efficiently, our routine now well established after several nights on the road. The air was filled with anticipation, not just for our impending return home, but also because it was the eve of the 4th of July. As darkness settled around us, the sky began to light up with sporadic fireworks, a prelude to the next day's celebrations. Sitting outside our tent, we watched the colorful explosions paint the night sky. The atmosphere was peaceful, yet there was an underlying tension that we couldn't quite explain. Perhaps it was the unusual setting, or maybe it was something more. As we sat in contemplation, both of us experienced odd sensations. More than once I caught a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, only to turn and find nothing there. My friend admitted to similar experiences, and we exchanged uneasy glances. Our curiosity piqued, and perhaps seeking to dispel our growing unease, we decided to explore our surroundings. Armed with a flashlight, we began to wander among the gravestones, reading inscriptions and reflecting on the lives they represented. It was during this walk that we came across a particularly poignant sight, a baby's grave adorned with toy cars. The small vehicles, carefully arranged on the ledge of the gravestone, spoke volumes about the love and loss experienced by this child's family. As we stood in silent respect, a sudden chilling wind swept through the cemetery. It was brief, lasting only a few seconds, but it left us both shivering. What happened next defied logical explanation. As we turned to continue our walk, we both saw it, a small, translucent figure, child-sized, gliding away from us. It was visible for only a moment before it simply vanished into the night air. We stood frozen, our eyes wide, trying to process what we had just witnessed. Shaken by the experience, we hurried back to our tent. Sleep did not come easily that night. We tossed and turned, each lost in our own thoughts about what we had seen. Every small sound seemed magnified in the darkness, and more than once we woke with a start, convinced we had heard footsteps or whispers just outside our tent. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the tent fabric, we felt a sense of relief. We had made it through the night, and it was time to pack up and begin our journey home. I unzipped the tent flap, eager to step out into the morning air and shake off the unnerving experiences of the night. But as I opened the tent, I was stopped in my tracks. There, on the ground just outside our tent, lay 2 toy cars. They were identical to the ones we had seen on the baby's grave the night before. My friend and I exchanged bewildered looks, each silently questioning if the other had moved the cars during the night. But we both knew we hadn't left the tent. With a mixture of awe and trepidation, we walked back to the baby's grave. Sure enough, there were 2 empty spots where cars had been the previous evening. We carefully placed the cars back in their original positions, our hands trembling slightly as we did so. As we packed up our campsite and prepared to leave, a profound silence hung between us. The events of the night had shaken our understanding of the world. I had always considered myself a skeptic when it came to supernatural occurrences, but what we had experienced in that cemetery was beyond rational explanation. Our ride home was quieter than the journey out had been. We pedaled steadily, each lost in our own thoughts about what we had witnessed. The beautiful scenery that surrounded us seemed somehow different now, as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a world more mysterious and complex than we had previously imagined. As we neared our hometown, we finally began to discuss the events in the cemetery. We shared our fears, our doubts, and our newfound belief in things beyond our understanding. We agreed that while the experience had been unsettling, it had also been profound, opening our eyes to possibilities we had never before considered. Our bicycle trip had started as a simple adventure, a chance to challenge ourselves physically and explore new places. But it had become so much more. We had not only tested our physical limits, but also expanded the boundaries of our beliefs. The memory of that night in the cemetery would stay with us forever, a reminder that there are things in this world that defy explanation, things that can only be understood through experience. As we parted ways at the end of our journey, we made a pact to return to that cemetery one day, not out of a morbid fascination, but out of respect for the experiences we had there and the truths we had glimpsed. We knew that our lives had been changed by this trip, and that we would never look at the world quite the same way again. The toy cars, the ghostly figure, the inexplicable movements, all of these had combined to create an experience that challenged our perceptions of reality. And as we returned to our normal lives, we carried with us a new sense of wonder and a deeper appreciation for the mysteries that surround us every day. Our bicycle trip had been more than just a physical journey. It had been a journey of the spirit, one that had opened our eyes to the possibility that there is more to this world than what we can see and touch. And for that, we were profoundly grateful. The rain fell in heavy sheets, drumming against the windshield of my battered Subaru as I navigated the winding mountain roads. The wipers struggled to keep up, squeaking across the glass in a futile attempt to clear my view. I leaned forward, squinting through the haze, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The GPS on my phone had lost signal miles ago, leaving me to rely on the sparse road signs that occasionally materialized out of the gloom. "We're not lost, Patches," I said, glancing at the carrier in the passenger seat. "We're just taking the scenic route." My feline companion, a one-eyed tabby with a white patch on his chest, meowed softly in response. His green eye gleamed in the dim light of the dashboard, a mixture of curiosity and concern in his gaze. I reached over, wiggling my fingers through the grate of the carrier. Patches rubbed his head against them, his purr a comforting rumble above the patter of rain and the hum of the engine. "I know, buddy, I'm not thrilled about this either, but we didn't have much choice, did we?" My mind wandered back to the events that had led us here, to this lonely road in the middle of nowhere, our possessions crammed into the back of the car. 3 days ago, I had stood in the empty living room of my apartment, surrounded by a few cardboard boxes and a battered suitcase. The bare walls echoed with memories of happier times, now faded and bitter. Sunlight had streamed through the naked windows, illuminating the dust motes swirling in the air. I had taken a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Well, Patches, this is it," I had said, glancing down at my feline companion. His one green eye had fixed on me with an intensity that seemed to say, "It's about time." He was curled up on top of a box labeled Art Supplies, his orange and white fur a stark contrast against the brown cardboard. I had knelt down to scratch behind his ears, feeling the rough texture of his fur beneath my fingertips. "You're right, buddy. We should have done this a long time ago." As I stood up, my gaze had fallen on the small pile of possessions that represented my life. After years of marriage supporting my ex-husband's career and dreams, I was left with so little. A few boxes of clothes, some art supplies, and a handful of personal items. It was both liberating and terrifying. I had picked up a framed photo from the top of a nearby box. It was a picture of us on our wedding day, both of us smiling brightly at the camera. I had traced my finger along the edge of the frame, remembering the hope and love I had felt that day. With a sigh, I had placed the photo face down in the box. "Come on, Patches," I had said, picking up the cat carrier. "Time to go." Patches had let out a disgruntled meow as I coaxed him into the carrier. He had never been fond of confinement, but I knew he'd settle down once we were on the road. I had made one last sweep of the apartment, checking closets and drawers for anything I might have missed. In the bedroom, I had paused at the sight of a small velvet box on the dresser. Inside was the engagement ring he had given me, its diamond catching the light. I had considered taking it, but then I closed the box and left it where it was. Some things were better left behind. Back in the living room, I had hefted 2 boxes, one stacked on top of the other, and made my way down to the car parked outside. The summer heat had hit me like a wall as I stepped out of the air-conditioned building. Sweat had beaded on my forehead as I carefully navigated the steps down to the sidewalk. Trip after trip, I had loaded my life into the car. Patches had watched from his carrier, placed safely in the passenger seat. With each box, I had felt a mixture of sadness and relief. This was the end of one chapter of my life, but also the beginning of another. As I had placed the last box in the car, I heard a familiar voice call out, "Is that you, dear?" I had turned to see Mrs. Wilkins, my elderly neighbor, peering at me from her porch next door. Her wispy white hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and she wore her usual floral housecoat. "Hi, Mrs. Wilkins," I had said, forcing a smile. "Yeah, it's me. I'm just moving out. Her eyes had widened with concern. "Oh dear, I had no idea. Are you and—" I had nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Mrs. Wilkins had always been kind to me, often inviting me over for tea and cookies when my ex was working late. She had shuffled down her steps and across the small patch of grass separating our buildings. Before I knew it, she had enveloped me in a warm, grandmotherly hug. The scent of lavender and baking had filled my nose, and I had felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "You take care of yourself, dear," she had said, patting my back. "And remember, you're stronger than you know." I had pulled back, wiping at my eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilkins, for everything." She had smiled, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "And don't you forget to call once you're settled. I want to hear all about your new adventures." I had promised I would, then watched as she made her way back to her porch. With a final wave, I had climbed into the driver's seat of the car. Patches had meowed softly from his carrier beside me. "I know, buddy," I had said, reaching over to stick my fingers through the grate. He had rubbed his head against them, purring. I had turned the key in the ignition, the engine rumbling to life. As I pulled away from the curb, I had caught a glimpse of my reflection in the rearview mirror. My brown hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and there were dark circles under my eyes from nights of restless sleep. But there was something else there, too. A glimmer of hope, of possibility. Now, 3 days later, that hope felt like a distant memory as I peered through the rain-soaked windshield. The weather had taken a turn for the worse as we neared our destination, my aunt's cabin in the mountains of North Carolina. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a place to regroup and figure out my next move. But at that moment, as lightning flashed across the sky and thunder rumbled ominously, I was beginning to wonder if I had made a terrible mistake. The car's headlights barely penetrated the curtain of rain, casting an eerie glow on the road ahead. Trees loomed on either side, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers through the mist. I shivered, despite the warmth of the car's interior. Suddenly, a dark shape darted across the road. I gasped, slamming on the brakes. The car skidded on the wet asphalt, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought we were going to spin out of control. But somehow I managed to keep us on the road, coming to a stop with a jolt that sent Patches yowling in protest. "Sorry, buddy," I said, my voice shaky. "Are you okay?" Patches meowed indignantly, but seemed unharmed. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. What had that been? A deer? A bear? My imagination conjured up all sorts of possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. I was about to start driving again when I noticed something odd. The engine was making a strange sputtering sound, and the dashboard lights were flickering. "No, no, no," I muttered, turning the key. The engine coughed and wheezed, but refused to turn over. "Come on, don't do this to me now." But it was no use. The car had given up the ghost, leaving us stranded in the middle of nowhere, in the pouring rain, with night falling fast. I slumped back in my seat, feeling despair wash over me. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. We were supposed to arrive at the cabin, start our new life, leave all the bad memories behind. Instead, here we were, stuck on a lonely mountain road with no cell signal and no idea how far we were from civilization. Patches let out a plaintive meow, as if sensing my distress. I reached over to scratch his ears through the carrier. "It's okay, buddy, we'll figure this out. We always do, right?" As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I noticed something in the distance, a faint light barely visible through the rain and mist. Could it be a house, a gas station? Any sign of human habitation would be welcome at this point. I weighed my options. I could stay with the car and hope someone drove by, but given how deserted the road had been, that didn't seem likely. Or I could try to make it to that light, hopefully find help, and come back for the car later. After a moment's hesitation, I made my decision. I couldn't just sit here and do nothing. "All right, Patches," I said, grabbing his carrier and my small overnight bag. We're going on a little adventure." I stepped out of the car, immediately getting drenched by the downpour. The wind whipped around me, chilling me to the bone. I locked the car, more out of habit than any real concern for its contents, and set off towards the mysterious light. The going was tough. The road was slick with rain, and my shoes kept sinking into the muddy shoulder. Patches voiced his displeasure at the situation with occasional yowls, but I pressed on, driven by the hope of finding shelter. As we got closer, I could make out more details. It wasn't a house, as I had first thought, but some kind of building, a large structure with a neon sign flickering weakly in the storm. My heart leapt as I made out the words, "Blackwood's Garage and Auto Shop." Relief flooded through me. A garage meant people, phones, maybe even a tow truck. I quickened my pace, almost slipping in my haste to reach the building. Finally, I stood before the garage's entrance, a large roll-up door flanked by a smaller pedestrian door. I set Patches's carrier down and knocked on the door, harder than I had intended in my desperation. For a long moment there was no response. I knocked again, louder this time. "Hello?" I called out. "Is anyone there? Please, I need help." Just as I was about to give up hope, I heard movement inside, the sound of locks being undone, and then the door creaked open, revealing a wizened face peering out at me. "Well, well," croaked an elderly woman, her silver hair tied back in a tight bun. "What brings you to my doorstep at this hour, child?" "I'm so sorry to bother you," I said, shifting Patch's carrier to my other hand. "My car broke down about half a mile back, and I saw your light. I was hoping you might be able to help." The woman's piercing blue eyes studied me for a moment before her face broke into a warm smile. "Of course, dear. Can't leave you stranded out here in the dark, can we? I'm Miss Blackwood. Come in, come in." She stepped back, gesturing for me to enter. As I crossed the threshold, the scent of motor oil and something herbal, lavender maybe, filled my nostrils. "Thank you so much," I said, relief washing over me. "I'm Zoe, and this is Patches." Miss Blackwood peered at the carrier. "Ah, a feline friend, how lovely." The interior of the garage was cluttered but clean, with tools neatly arranged on pegboards and various car parts stacked on shelves. In the corner, an old radio played soft jazz, the music tinny and slightly out of tune. "Liam, Finn," Miss Blackwood called out, "we've got a customer." From the shadows at the back of the garage emerged two young men. The taller one, with short dark hair and brooding eyes, hung back, while the other, blond and strikingly handsome, stepped forward with a charming smile. "This is Zoe," Miss Blackwood said. "Her car's broken down on the road. Liam, why don't you go take a look? Finn can get her information." Liam nodded silently and grabbed a toolbox before heading out the door. Finn approached me, his blue eyes twinkling in the fluorescent light. "Let's get you sorted out," he said, his voice smooth as honey. "Can you tell me what happened with your car?" As I explained the situation, Finn jotted down notes on a clipboard. His presence was magnetic, and I found myself drawn to his easy manner and quick smile. But every time he stepped closer, Patches let out a low, warning growl. "Seems like your cat's not too fond of me," Finn chuckled, keeping his distance. "I'm sorry," I said, frowning at Patches's uncharacteristic behavior. "He's usually not like this with strangers." Finn shrugged it off, but I noticed a flicker of something, annoyance, concern, cross his face before his charming smile returned. As we finished up the paperwork, Patches suddenly lashed out, his paw darting through the carrier's grate to swat at Finn's hand. Finn jerked back, narrowly avoiding the cat's claws. "Patches?" I exclaimed, shocked. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what's gotten into him." "No harm done," Finn said, but his smile seemed strained now. "I should go check on Liam's progress. Excuse me." As Finn disappeared into the night, I turned to Miss Blackwood, who had been watching the exchange with keen interest. "I really am sorry about Patches," I said. "He's never acted like this before." Miss Blackwood patted my arm, her touch surprisingly cold. "Don't you worry, dear. Animals have a way of sensing things we can't. Now why don't you have a seat? This might take a while. I settled into a worn armchair, Patch's carrier at my feet. As Miss Blackwood bustled about making tea, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Patch's strange behavior, the isolated location of the garage, the odd dynamic between Miss Blackwood and her grandsons, it all added up to a sense of unease that I couldn't quite shake. The garage's interior was a curious mix of mechanical clutter and homey touches. A crocheted blanket draped over a workbench, potted plants nestled between toolboxes. The soft jazz from the old radio provided a soothing backdrop, almost masking the unsettling quiet of the forest outside. Miss Blackwood returned, pressing a steaming mug into my hands. The warmth was comforting against my palms, and the herbal aroma helped ease some of the tension in my shoulders. "Thank you," I said, taking a cautious sip. The tea was pleasantly bitter, with an unfamiliar, earthy undertone. Miss Blackwood settled into a chair opposite me, her piercing blue eyes studying me over the rim of her own mug. "So, Zoe," she began, her voice carrying a hint of curiosity, "what brings you to our neck of the woods? We don't get many travelers out this way, especially not at this hour." I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I'm starting over, I guess, moving to stay with my aunt for a while." "Ah, new beginnings," Miss Blackwood nodded sagely. "Always an adventure, but you do well to be careful in these parts, especially traveling alone." A chill ran down my spine despite the warmth of the tea. "What do you mean?" Miss Blackwood leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "There's a curse on these woods, you know. Been here longer than any of us. The old-timers say it was placed by a vengeful spirit, wronged by early settlers." I forced a skeptical laugh, but it sounded hollow even to my own ears. "A curse? Really?" "Oh, yes," Miss Blackwood continued, her eyes gleaming in the dim light. "They say it preys on lone travelers, those who've lost their way. There have been incidents over the years, folks who went into the forest and never came out." A shiver ran through me, and I clutched my mug tighter. That's just folklore, right? Old stories to keep kids from wandering off?" Miss Blackwood shrugged, but there was a knowing look in her eyes. "Perhaps, but there's often truth at the heart of such tales. Why, just last month a young man passing through vanished without a trace. His car was found abandoned on the road, not far from where yours broke down." I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the way my heart had begun to race. "That's terrible. Did they ever find him?" "No," Miss Blackwood said, shaking her head solemnly. "Some say he fell victim to the curse. Others think he simply ran off, starting a new life somewhere. But in these woods, well, it's best to stay vigilant." The garage door creaked open, and I jumped, nearly spilling my tea. Liam entered, his expression unreadable as he wiped his hands on a greasy rag. "How's it looking?" I asked, eager for a change of subject. Liam shrugged. "The alternator's shot. We'll need to order a new one. Won't be here till morning at the earliest." My heart sank. "Oh, I see." The thought of spending the night here, with Miss Blackwood's ominous words echoing in my mind, filled me with dread. "Don't you worry, dear," Miss Blackwood said, patting my knee. "We've got a spare room upstairs. You can stay the night, and we'll get you sorted first thing in the morning." I forced a smile, not wanting to seem ungrateful. "That's very kind of you." As if sensing my unease, Patches let out a soft meow from his carrier. I reached down to scratch his ears through the grate, drawing comfort from his familiar presence. The door opened again, and Finn strode in, all easy smiles and charm. "All squared away for the night?" he asked, his gaze lingering on me a moment too long. I nodded, unable to shake the feeling of being watched, observed. "Yes, thank you. You've all been so helpful." "Well, I'd best be heading home," Finn said, grabbing his jacket from a hook by the door. "Early start tomorrow and all that." As he moved to leave, Liam stepped forward, holding out a set of keys. "Here," he said gruffly, addressing me for the first time, "for your car so we can get started early." Our fingers brushed as I took the keys, and an inexplicable chill ran down my spine. Liam's eyes met mine for a brief moment, dark and unreadable, before he quickly looked away. "Thank you," I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. As Finn left and Liam retreated to the back of the garage, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. Miss Blackwood's tales of curses and disappearances swirled in my mind, mixing with the strange behavior of her grandsons and Patch's uncharacteristic aggression. I sipped the last of my now cold tea, trying to calm my nerves. It was just one night, I told myself. In the morning I'd be back on the road, leaving this strange encounter behind me. Miss Blackwood showed me to the spare room upstairs, a small, cluttered space filled with odds and ends. An old brass bed took up most of the room, its quilt faded but clean. "It's not much," Miss Blackwood said apologetically, "but it should do for the night." "It's perfect," I assured her, setting Patch's carrier down on a rickety chair. "Thank you again for your hospitality." Miss Blackwood smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sleep well, dear, and remember, keep the door locked." With that cryptic warning she left, her footsteps creaking on the old wooden stairs. I let out a long breath, feeling the weight of the day settle on my shoulders. I opened Patch's carrier, and he darted out, immediately beginning to explore every corner of the room. "What do you think, buddy?" I asked, watching him sniff suspiciously at the leg of an antique dresser. "Are we being paranoid, or is there something off about this place?" Patches paused in his investigation to look at me, his one eye gleaming in the dim light of the bedside lamp. He let out a soft meow that I chose to interpret as agreement. I changed into my pajamas and settled into bed, Patches curling up at my feet. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me. Every creak of the old house, every whisper of wind through the trees outside set my nerves on edge. Miss Blackwood's stories of curses and vanishing travelers played on repeat in my mind. Just as I was finally drifting off, a noise jerked me back to alertness. It was faint, barely audible over the sound of the rain still pattering against the window, but unmistakable. Footsteps moving about downstairs. I sat up, my heart pounding. Patches was already awake, his fur standing on end as he stared intently at the closed door. I held my breath, straining to listen. The footsteps seemed to be moving towards the stairs. Panic gripped me. Should I barricade the door, try to escape through the window, call for help? But before I could decide on a course of action, the footsteps receded, fading back into silence. I didn't sleep much that night, drifting in and out of uneasy dreams filled with dark forests and lurking shadows. When dawn finally broke, I was more than ready to leave. I packed up quickly, coaxing a disgruntled Patches back into his carrier. As I made my way downstairs, I was surprised to find the garage already bustling with activity. Liam was bent over the open hood of my car, while Finn chatted animatedly with a customer I didn't recognize. Miss Blackwood materialized at my elbow, making me jump. "Good morning, dear," she said, her voice cheery. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you," I lied, not wanting to mention the strange noises in the night. "How's my car looking?" "Liam's just finishing up now," she said, guiding me towards the front desk. "Why don't we get you checked out?" As I settled the bill, I couldn't shake the feeling of relief. In just a few minutes, we'd be back on the road, putting this strange interlude behind us. Liam approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "All set," he said gruffly. "Should run fine now." "Thank you," I said, offering a smile that he didn't return. "For everything." I loaded Patches into the car and climbed into the driver's seat, my hand shaking slightly as I inserted the key into the ignition. To my immense relief, the engine roared to life without hesitation. As I pulled out of the garage, I caught a glimpse of Miss Blackwood and her grandsons in the rearview mirror. They stood in a line, watching me drive away. For a moment I could have sworn I saw something flicker in their eyes, something dark and hungry. But then I blinked, and they were just 3 figures growing smaller in the distance. The rain had stopped, and weak sunlight filtered through the trees as I navigated the winding mountain road. With each mile that passed, I felt the knot of tension in my chest begin to loosen. Patches dozed in his carrier, his soft snores a comforting soundtrack. It wasn't until we were well clear of the forest, the landscape opening up into rolling hills, that I allowed myself to fully relax. Whatever strangeness we had encountered at Blackwood's garage, whether real or imagined, was behind us now. As I merged onto the highway that would take us the rest of the way to my aunt's house, I glanced at Patches. "Well, buddy," I said, "I think our adventure is finally over." Patches opened his eye, regarding me with what I could have sworn was a skeptical expression. He let out a small meow as if to say, "Don't be too sure about that." I laughed, the sound surprising me with its genuineness. "You're right," I admitted. "Our adventure is just beginning, isn't it?" And as we drove on towards our new life, I felt a surge of excitement mixed with the lingering unease. Whatever lay ahead, whatever challenges we might face, I knew one thing for certain: Patches and I would face it together. However, our sense of relief was short-lived. As we rounded a bend in the road, I noticed something odd in my rearview mirror. A car was approaching fast, much too fast for these winding mountain roads. As it drew closer, my heart sank. I recognized the vehicle. It was Finn's beaten-up pickup truck. "What the?" I muttered, pressing down on the accelerator. Patches meowed in alarm as we picked up speed. The truck was gaining on us, and I could see Finn's face in the rearview mirror now, his usually charming features twisted into a mask of rage. What did he want? Why was he chasing us? Suddenly he rammed into the back of my car, the impact jolting us forward. Patches yowled in fear, and I gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to keep control of the vehicle. "Hang on, Patches," I yelled, swerving to avoid another hit. The road ahead curved sharply, hugging the side of the mountain. On one side was a sheer rock face, on the other a steep drop-off. My palms were sweating as I navigated the treacherous path, all too aware of Finn's truck bearing down on us. Just as we were about to round the curve, Finn made his move. His truck pulled up alongside us, and I saw him lean out of his window, something glinting in his hand. With horror, I realized it was the same ceremonial dagger Miss Blackwood had shown me the night before. "The forest demands a sacrifice," Finn yelled, his eyes wild and unfocused. In that moment of distraction, I lost control of the car. We spun, tires screeching on the wet asphalt. The world turned upside down as we rolled, once, twice, before coming to rest on the edge of the cliff. Everything hurt. The taste of blood filled my mouth, and I could hear Patches crying out in distress. Through the shattered windshield, I saw Finn approaching, dagger in hand. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice oddly calm, "but it's the only way to lift the curse." As he raised the dagger, a blur of orange and white shot past me. Patches, somehow free from his carrier, launched himself at Finn's face with a ferocious yowl. Finn screamed, stumbling backward as Patches' claws raked across his eyes. The dagger fell from his grasp, clattering on the road. In his panic, Finn lost his footing, teetering on the edge of the cliff. For a moment he windmilled his arms, trying to regain his balance. Then, with a look of sheer terror, he fell backward, disappearing over the edge. Patches limped back to the car, bleeding from several cuts, but looking triumphant. I reached out, wincing at the pain in my arm, and pulled him close. "You saved me," I whispered, burying my face in his fur. "You brave, crazy cat." In the distance, I could hear sirens approaching. Someone must have reported the accident. As the adrenaline began to fade, the full weight of what had happened settled over me. The curse, the chase, Finn's madness, it all seemed too fantastical to be real. But as I held Patches close, listening to the approaching sirens and feeling the cool mountain air on my face, I knew that our lives had changed irrevocably. Whatever lay ahead, whatever strange and terrifying adventures awaited us, I knew one thing for certain. Patches and I would face it together, our bond stronger than ever. The road ahead was uncertain, possibly dangerous, but with my one-eyed wonder cat by my side, I felt ready to face whatever came our way. As night settled over Asheville, I found myself staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The events of the past few weeks played on an endless loop in my mind. I glanced at the clock. 11:43 p.m. I rolled onto my side, careful not to disturb Patches, who was curled up at the foot of the bed. "Psst, Patches," I whispered. "You awake?" One green eye cracked open, regarding me with sleepy curiosity. I patted the space next to me on the pillow. "Come here, buddy, I could use some company." Patches stretched languidly, his bandaged paw extended. He padded up the bed, settling into the crook of my arm with a contented purr. I buried my face in his soft fur, inhaling the familiar scent. "You know," I murmured, "I never thanked you properly for saving my life. I mean, sure, there's been all this attention and fancy cat food, but that's not really for you, is it?" Patches blinked slowly in response, his purr deepening. "I was thinking," I continued, running my fingers through his fur, "maybe it's time you got a permanent spot up here. What do you say? Want to be my official bed buddy?" His purr intensified, and he kneaded my arm gently with his good paw. I took that as a resounding yes. "I don't know how I would have gotten through all this without you," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "When I think about how close I came to... I trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Patches nudged my chin with his head as if sensing my distress. I scratched behind his ears, grateful for his unwavering support. A girl and her one-eyed wonder cat taking on the world, or at least taking on Asheville, I mused. Patches yawned widely, showing off his impressive set of teeth, the same teeth that had saved my life. I couldn't help but smile. All right, I get the hint. Time for sleep," I said, settling deeper into the pillows. "Good night, Patches. Sweet dreams, my brave boy." On January 13th, 2006, in the city of Acasuso, part of the Argentine capital, Buenos Aires, an armed robbery took place at the largest bank in Argentina. The gang entered the bank and took employees and customers hostage. After 15 minutes, they felt they had made a mistake and needed to escape. One of them came out with a hostage, only to be surprised by a number of police officers surrounding the place. He had no choice but to return inside the bank and await his inevitable fate with his companions. Of course, you believed this story and thought what happened was real. But like the professor in the series La Casa de Papel, everything had been calculated. The leader here was orchestrating the smartest heist in history, an operation that would later be called the robbery of the century. Today I'll tell you about the robbery of the century, considered the smartest heist in human history. Like La Casa de Papel, every detail in this story, no matter how small, was meticulously calculated and planned. Of course, the plan might be successful, but the fate of the gang could be different. The story began on May 15, 2005. On this remarkable date, Fernando Araujo went to his psychiatrist and told him he intended to do something to bring vitality and passion back into his life. The doctor asked, "What is this thing you intend to do?" He replied, "Now that I'm 43 years old, perhaps the only thing I love is robbing a bank." Of course, the doctor laughed and said, "This idea is impossible." Araujo responded, "No, it's not impossible, and I've actually been planning to rob a bank for a while." Naturally, their discussion was lengthy and they didn't reach a conclusion. But what you need to know is that Araujo wasn't lying and he really intended to rob a bank. The doctor, until the very last moment, didn't believe it. He felt that Araujo was desperate, tired of life, and saying anything. What was special about Araujo was that he was an extremely intelligent person. He worked as a transaction processor and was a theater actor. When Araujo decided to rob a bank, he left everything and devoted himself to planning the mission. It started with him riding his motorcycle every day, touring the streets of Acasuso, Argentina. The bank that caught his attention the most was Banco Rio. The bank was large and very famous, with 80% of Argentines keeping their money there. Of course, the bank offered an additional feature for customers: safety deposit boxes where they could store any valuable items such as gold, jewelry, diamonds, and cash, anything the client wanted. Here, Araujo moved to the second step, which was determining the best way to rob this bank. Araujo had two options. The first method was to enter the bank and steal the employee's cash drawer. Of course, this method had a weak return because, according to the law, the maximum amount that could be in the drawer was $10,000, and if he could only steal one drawer, the gain wouldn't be worthwhile. In short, the risk wasn't worth it. Additionally, escaping from the bank wouldn't be easy at all because within minutes, the police would have filled the place. Therefore, the risk was very high with this method, and the return was weak. The second method was to enter the bank at night, reach the deposit vault, and steal everything from it. Of course, this method had a very large return, and was certainly the goal of any thief in this world. But how could it be implemented? Even if a tunnel was dug and the vault was reached, surveillance cameras filled the entire place and were directly connected to the city police. This means that as soon as a camera was disabled, an alarm would be sent immediately. Moreover, there were heat sensors that detected any movement inside and around the vault, so the matter seemed impossible. But despite all this, the man didn't give up. He began to think of a way to enter the bank and rob the vault without being discovered. He thought about digging a tunnel under the bank that would lead to the vault, and before entering, he would prepare everything in it, then return and escape through the same tunnel. But digging such a tunnel was impossible, as it required equipment and months of work, and would certainly be discovered. He thought about renting a warehouse, shop, house, or land near the bank and digging a hole in the property he would rent next to the bank, and from there complete a tunnel between it and the bank's vault to steal. But he realized that such a project would cost an astronomical amount, in addition to needing to dig a 220-meter-long tunnel to reach the vault. It was an impossible story. So what was the solution? The solution appeared by chance. Araujo was with a real estate agent wanting to see an apartment near the bank. He rode his motorcycle and went to see the house. On the way, he noticed that the road leading to the bank and passing right next to it had a large number of sewer covers. What does this mean? That the main sewer passes right in front of the bank. So instead of digging a long tunnel from one place to another, he could enter the bank through the sewers. When he continued along the road and examined all the sewer openings, he was surprised that the sewer ended with a large square opening over 2.5 meters high. Under the opening was a large water outlet. This meant there was no need to look for a property or dig a tunnel. The tunnel already existed. He decided to see how far the vault was from the sewer. He noticed that the large sewer opening was only 160 meters away from the bank. This meant walking inside this tunnel for just 2 minutes would put him under the bank. Indeed, he entered the tunnel and examined it completely and said to himself, "We rely on God, this is what I was looking for." He then sat at home for 35 days, planning how he would enter the bank. When the plan was ready, he moved to the second phase, which was searching for people to help him with the plan and work with him, because alone the robbery operation would not succeed. Among the people who were candidates for this mission was his friend, Sebastian Bolster. Sebastian works as an electronic and mechanical engineer, a person far removed from theft or carrying out such operations. However, according to Araujo's point of view, this was very good because he didn't want his first partner in this theft to be a criminal. In addition, Sebastian was distinguished by something very important. He hated Banco Rio specifically. The reason was that his father and family lost all their properties when the largest bank in Argentina went bankrupt. When they collected money again and put it in Banco Rio, the bank seized their money and sold their house because they defaulted on loan payments. So the man found this story an opportunity to take revenge on the bank that deprived him of his money. The first thing Araujo and Sebastian did was agree to change their names. They said to each other, "Let's get used to these names before the team grows." Araujo's name became the leader, and Sebastian became the engineer. Remember these names because everything after that was done by nicknames. The leader and the engineer went to the bank site, went down into the main sewer and studied its area and how far it was from the bank. They kept working on this for a week. After that, the engineer went to the bank and told them he owned 6 kilograms of gold and wanted to hide it with them. They went down to the vault and started looking at it. They opened the door and showed him the deposit boxes. He asked them to open one of the boxes in front of him to see the level of security in it. Everything he was doing was being filmed with a hidden camera he had placed inside his clothes. After this visit, the engineer returned and watched the videos with the leader, and they thought together about how they would overcome each step. The main problem they faced was that they needed significant financial support, as they wanted to buy a lot of equipment and tools. Here, the leader contacted the third person in the gang, nicknamed the Doctor. To this day, no one knows the Doctor's name or identity because he is an educated person with social and scientific standing. But at the same time, he knows many criminals and has experience in suspicious work. The Doctor took on the task of forming the team, as he was the one who brought together the people who had an effective role in the gang. The first person was named Beto La Torre, and his nickname was the Funder. He was skilled in fraud and deception and able to steal from anyone without them noticing. He had a tremendous ability to negotiate and persuade, a criminal record full of extensive experience in fraud. When the leader told him about the plan, he immediately agreed and said he had a large truck he would sell to fund this operation. They needed 2 more people, one to be responsible for the drilling work and dangerous tasks, and another to drive the car they would escape in. The Doctor suggested the name Luis Solanas, a former member of one of the most famous gangs in Argentina. He spent 15 years in prison after being sentenced 9 times. He was a former drug dealer, a professional thief, and a brilliant actor. More than once he was transferred from prison to the hospital after pretending he was dying. Every time he did this, his goal was to get out to breathe the air outside the prison. And after all I've told you about him, imagine that they called him the Violent One. The last to join the gang was of unknown identity, and they called him the Kid. And so the team was complete. The leader, the engineer, the Doctor, the Funder, the Violent One, and the Kid. The strange thing is that they were all smart, and each one of them had an area in which they excelled. For example, the leader asked for plans of the streets surrounding the bank, and logically the person who would bring these plans would be the Doctor. Indeed, the Doctor brought the street plans, but the Violent One was able to bring the bank's plan itself. When they asked him how he was able to get the plan, he said to them, "We agreed at the beginning that names and sources would remain secret, so please adhere to the rule." Of course, the design he brought was 100% correct, and after they saw the maps, they were able to accurately determine the location of the vault. The plan was to dig a tunnel that would lead them to the vault, enter, and steal what was in it. However, the drilling in the sewers was done at night. They went down into the sewers with drilling devices and equipment, and began drilling from the ceiling of the sewage conduit upwards towards the vault. The distance was 30 meters, and the expected time to complete the drilling operation was 2 months. During this period, the engineer was working on something else entirely, which was how to enter the vault without activating the sensors there. There was an expensive solution, but it was the best possible, which was to design special suits that hide body heat, so the sensors would not detect body heat. After he finished the design, he bought a thermal camera and tested the suit, and indeed the experiment succeeded. The problem was that the suit was very heavy and rigid. Therefore, they would indeed enter secretly without the sensors noticing, but their movement inside the vault would be very difficult. Of course, he made a complete suit, and they started training on it. It was impossible because the suit hindered their movement, and they wouldn't be able to enter the bank with it. Here the leader intervened and proposed a brilliant idea, but it was crazy in every sense of the word. He said to them, "Why do we enter through the bank door but escape through the tunnel?" He explained the idea and everyone agreed. And soon you will know what happened. Now let's continue in order. When they agreed that the entry would be through the bank door and the exit through the tunnel, the idea of thermal suits was canceled, but they needed something new, which was to have weapons when they entered the bank. The leader was against the idea of having any weapons, firstly so that there would be no harm or injury to anyone inside the bank, because his goal from the operation was to regain his passion for life and not to scare or kill people. And the second reason was that if the plan failed and they had weapons, their crime would be doubled. But with the new update to the plan, he had no solution but to have weapons. Therefore, the leader asked the funder to bring weapons for the team, but he asked for a special type that doesn't come to mind. You will know about this at the end of the story. The important thing is that the funder brought the weapons that were requested exactly. And as much as the leader was happy with the type of weapons, he invited everyone at his expense to dinner. Here we reach the final stage, which is how to escape from the bank. How will they escape from the bank? As we said, they will escape through the tunnel, but the problem they faced was that if they decided to go down into the tunnel and exit from the sewer opening located 160 meters from the bank, the police would certainly catch them there. So they had to think of a brilliant way that wouldn't occur to the police. And since the leader had calculated everything, he told them that the best place to exit was one of the sewer openings on the road. Everyone objected and told him that they would be exposed, and this was expected. Here he told them the second part of the plan, and said that after they enter the vault, they will throw the stolen items into the tunnel they dug, and after they finish, they will exit the vault through this tunnel and escape into the sewage system. Here, inflatable boats will be waiting for them to exit in the opposite direction of the sewage opening. They will go from there to a specific sewer opening 200 meters away from the bank. This opening will have an old Volkswagen car standing over it. This car has an opening from below for them to enter into the car. Indeed, they brought a car of the required type and made this opening in it at the funder's house. Everything was happening in front of the funder's wife, and of course he told them that she was trustworthy and it was impossible for her to talk about anything. While they were working on the car, the engineer was working on a device he called the cannon. This device was a large compressor whose job was to break the vault lock, and then this device would be used to break the locks of the safes. Of course, the device was 100% successful and able to break any lock within 7 seconds. Finally, the day of execution came and the brilliant plan began. On January 13, 2006, an old Volkswagen car stopped in front of the bank door. 4 people got out wearing gray formal suits, masked and wearing black hats on their heads. The strange thing was that their hair was blonde and long. Of course, this outfit was the leader's idea. They wore blonde wigs so that their real hair color wouldn't be known. Those who entered the bank were the leader, the doctor, the violent one, and the funder, while the engineer was inside the sewers. He entered through the tunnel until he reached the vault wall. He entered with a compressor, hammer, and equipment to break the wall. As soon as the signal arrived and he knew that his colleagues had entered the bank, he began to hit the wall to break it. The goal was to break the wall, but not to penetrate it until the leader allowed him to do so. The important thing is that the 4 masked men inside the bank took control of the bank and held everyone hostage. Their movements and behaviors were strange in a way that made everyone in the bank think they were dangerous, and at the same time gave everyone the impression that they were afraid because their plan had failed. Of course, after a quarter of an hour, the police filled the place and it was time for the next step. The funder took one of the hostages and went out with her, pretending to be surprised by the police who filled the place, then returned inside the bank frightened. They held everyone and started behaving in a way that suggested to all the hostages that the plan had failed, and that they wanted any way to escape from the main door. Here there was a person who posed a big problem for the gang, and he was the security guard who was sitting in the monitoring room behind the cameras. He was telling the police about the gang's movements, so they had to force him out of the room. The leader ran towards the guard and said to him, "For every additional minute you stay inside the room, we will kill a hostage." The violent one took one of the hostages forcefully and attacked the room and put the gun to her head. Here the leader said to the guard, "I promise you, if you leave the room, I will get you out of the bank and hand you over to the police, and I promise I won't harm any hostage." The guard agreed because the hostage begged him to agree. Indeed, the guard came out with one of the hostages and told the police the story. They told the police that the gang was afraid and realized that they had been exposed and that they were surrounded inside and wanted to get out in any way and were afraid for their lives. Meanwhile, the leader ran with the doctor to the vault and gave the signal to the engineer to breach the wall and enter the vault. Of course, if he had opened the wall before the guard left the room, their plan would have been exposed and they would have been in trouble. But the leader had calculated this, so he told the engineer to wait and not do anything until he gave him the signal, and after they got the guard out and disabled the cameras completely, he allowed him to break the wall. Of course the wall broke and they opened the bags and the engineer entered with the cannon, and they started breaking all the locks of the safes and stole all their contents. Meanwhile, the violent one and the funder's task was to control the hostages and monitor the police and buy time until the robbery was completely finished. The violent one came out of the main door of the bank and pointed to the police with the phone in his hand, so the police chief understood that he was asking him to call. Indeed, the police chief called, and a dialogue began between them. The violent one said to him, "We entered the bank to steal and leave, but we didn't make it, and you came before we could escape, so we don't know what to do now." Here, the police chief noticed something strange. The violent one was visible from the bank window, and they could see and watch him. He was talking to the police chief with his foot on the desk, and his appearance suggested he wasn't afraid at all. Here, the police chief asked him, "Do you have a criminal record?" The violent one replied, "I've just gotten out of prison and haven't enjoyed my freedom yet, so I don't want to go back there. All I want is for none of the hostages to be harmed and for this story to end well. We'll tell you what our conditions are." The police chief agreed and gave him a 1-hour deadline. During this hour, the violent one returned to the leader to see if the plan was going well or not. He was surprised that the 3 had emptied half of the vault and packed it in bags. He was overjoyed and asked them how much time they needed. They told him they needed another hour and everything would be ready. Here they waited until the first hour was over. Then the violent one called the police chief again and said, "We're actually very sorry and want a safe way out. I apologize to the hostages and want to do something good for them. I want you to bring us pizza for us and the hostages. We want to eat together, then leave the bank and surrender ourselves with the hostages. If you don't fulfill this condition, we have no other solution but to end our lives and the lives of the hostages with us." Of course, the police chief agreed. He wanted to absolve himself of legal responsibility for what was happening, and since he agreed to the violent one's condition to bring pizza, they had extra time to finish the operation. Meanwhile, the doctor came out of the vault and told the violent one and the funder that they were done and it was time to withdraw. The funder asked all the hostages to lie on their stomachs on the ground while they stood above them watching. He told them that anyone who moved would be killed immediately. During this time, they slowly retreated into the vault. The doctor and the engineer went down into the tunnel and waited to receive all the stolen goods. The leader, the funder, and the violent one began throwing bags of stolen items into the tunnel, and the engineer and the doctor were below putting them inside the inflatable boats. They placed a large time bomb on the vault door, and next to it, they put a red piece of cloth on the ground and placed the weapons they had on it. Then they went down into the tunnel and escaped. They reached the sewer opening where the kid was waiting for them and came out of it and entered the car with the stolen goods. The car took off and went to the funder's house. They stopped inside the garage and entered the house immediately and turned on the TV to see what was happening with the police. The gang had stolen and returned home while the police were still standing outside. 2 hours after their escape, the police chief decided to storm the bank. The surprise was that the gang had disappeared and there was no trace of them. The funny thing is that the police chief stormed the bank after calling the phone he was talking to the funder on 33 times, meaning if he had answered there might have been hope, but he stormed the bank because he was tired of waiting. The plan succeeded 100%. They divided the money among them and each of them went their own way. Their agreement was to never meet again for any reason. While they were dividing the loot, the police were trying to solve the problem of the bomb that was on the vault door. The surprise was that the bomb was just a toy. Now the amazing things in the story are the weapons they left in the bank. These weapons were toys. Even in this, their matters were calculated because if the plan failed and they were caught, the weapons they had were toys, and therefore they wouldn't be charged with serious offenses. The leader had calculated all the details as I told you. The plan succeeded and each of them returned to their normal life, except that a strange story happened with the funder. One time the funder returned home and discovered that his wife had taken 3 bags of money worth $100,000. When he asked her why she did that, she said, "This is my share of the operation. I needed to buy some things." Sources confirm that this is what happened and that he argued with her. She threatened that she would report him and expose the plan if he continued shouting. Then he became silent and left the house and took all the remaining bags of money with him and hid them in another place. He returned in the evening to the house to find his wife sitting waiting for him anxiously. He argued with her and she said to him, "You're doing this because you've become rich and want to abandon me, and I won't allow you to do this." The next day at first light, the wife reported her husband. Then the funder was arrested, then the leader, then the engineer and the violent one. As for the doctor and the kid, no one knows anything about them because they had left the country. Even the money that was stolen, no one knows until today exactly how much it was worth. All sources confirm that the gang did not return anything they stole, and it was the bank that was damaged by the robbery and compensated all the customers. The gang members were sentenced to varying terms ranging from 9 to 15 years, but none of them stayed in prison for more than 3 years. Why? Because their popularity became great among the people, and everyone was demanding their release. More than one lawyer defended them, and more than one association demanded their release, and in the end, they got out of prison. Their story became the subject of a comedy action film starring them. The film caused a great stir and achieved tremendous success, and as a token of apology, the gang members allocated 30% of the film's profits to the bank that was harmed because of them. Their story was recorded as the smartest robbery operation in human history, and it was called the Robbery of the Century.